Home Sweet Home. Home Sweet Home 4-01, a measure of desperation. Bang! A Geth worker droid with a taser and zip ties found themselves planted into the ground near Tom by Lex's Krogan-sized wrench as the fight truly began. Tom called out to Lex, his voice sounding far away as the man was dogpiled by a horde of large dog Geth and several heavy workers. And as this happened, his body began to feel numb, sluggish, and unresponsive. Gunfire flashed, the screams of unprepared civilians echoing in his mind as Akane, the cruel Kitsune mistress, was more than happy to project such things into his mind directly, even as he did his best to fight her off. He could hear nothing, see nothing she did not allow him to. Even Tsukasa was having trouble keeping up with the AI code that was assaulting him from all avenues, despite her being a literal machine spirit at this point. Her laughter echoed in his ears as she took over his body, forcing him to move away from his peers in spite of all his desires to stay with his family. It terrified him that she had managed with so little effort to undo all his hard work, to claim him as though he was hers and pilot him like a drone until he was taken away from his world, his home he had spent everything to create. He sobbed without sound, cried without tears, and his mind screamed in agony and terror as he was forced to follow something and make his way to what might well be a fate worse than death. And then, as control over his sensory suite was re-established by Tsukasa, he found himself laying with his head in the lap of the foul, foul beast who would use his darkest fears against him so deliberately. He knew he had nothing he could do against her at that moment, his magic so utterly drained as it was, and that even at his current peak form, he wouldn't be able to kill her and successfully return to his family before they were all murdered by this freak. His breath frosted the air, crystalline matrices of ice forming near him, as the Kitsune ran her hands through his hair and laughed. "Quite the tenacious little bitch your guardian AI is," Akane giggled, poking him on the nose. "Almost as bad as that Fleur woman, or better yet, Rossweiser." His voice came back under his control as he growled at her, the sound deep and guttural in a way he had never managed before. "Stay away from my family," he tried to lash out at her, but his body merely jerked, still mostly under her control. "Oh, don't worry your fluffy little tail," Akane giggled, her eyes looking intensely at him as he pushed himself to find some way to hurt her, frost growing on the instrument panels in the room. "The only one I want is you!" Shit, what the fuck is with this woman? She was fucking terrifying. Also, what did she mean tail? He didn't have a tail. He felt something move underneath him as she poked at his stomach with her claws, drawing circles around his belly button. Bloody hell. Really? But Tsukasa was almost finished purging his systems. He just had to wait a little longer, and then he could. "Hey," Akane giggled, poking him on the nose. "You're just the cutest." One of her tails brushed up to his neck and injected something into him with a long needle. "Don't worry. I won't harm your family and I won't hinder your growth," Akane claimed, as though she expected him just to trust her. "But I will keep track of you, and I will play with you from time to time. So go back to your little home you've built for yourself, and fix it up properly with your people. And this time, pay attention to your projects and workers. Don't rely on magic to do your work for you." Her closed-eye smile was extremely threatening for some reason, and Tom knew full well it was because she was pissed at him for falling for her trap so easily. He didn't know how he knew this, but he did. "You should be able to move by now," Akane asked, just as his limbs unlocked themselves. He wasted no time launching himself away from her, the frost spreading with every step as he fled from the woman. If he stayed near her, he felt as though he was going to be infected by her and face a fate worse than death. Hell, she had already injected something into him, right into his brain. And his nanoms were saying it was simply a part of him, so he couldn't trust them to remove it. Whatever it was, it couldn't be good. And since he was almost entirely empty of magical reserves, and his cursed ice was no longer being contained by his magic and will, he was spreading the deadly frost everywhere he went. He was forced to run along the length of her ship, doing his best to rush to an escape pod or shuttle to hopefully land at the docks on his planet without being shot down. The Cult Mechanicus group that was doing their best to stay out of the way of the incoming ice were caught when he flicked his new tail at them, the ice following along the path of his arms or tail to freeze them solid at the cost of some of his remaining stamina. Tom knew full well he was going to have to rest as soon as possible so he could recover his magic, but he had no way to do so at the moment. He would simply have to clean up the ice later with his magic and hope it didn't break anything on his world. Because he did not trust the Kitsune at her word. After all, foxes were the least trustworthy animal in the multiverse. As Tom landed in the docking station, pulling a pistol from the wall of the shuttle, in some attempt to fight his way through the halls and back to his family, he noticed that the vast majority of the fighting was already over. Lex and Tivus had managed to team up and fight their way into the dock section, pushing out all of the Geth and the Cult Mechanicus to their own ships, where they took off at high speeds. He groaned, doing his best not to be caught in the line of fire, but still hacking the biometric lock and shooting the bastards in the back, while making his way towards his allies. Of course, Rossweiser was quick to call out over the comm lines built into the planetary shell, her voice a welcome sign of a near end to the current conflict. "Tom made it back. I want those cannons online now. Get to the reactor cores and fix the damage so we can start pounding that bitch," she raged, absolutely livid. In response to her words, Akane's fleet began to leave, slowly heading away from their world as if to taunt them while they could do nothing but watch, especially while running on emergency power like so. Keeping life support active was about the only thing they could do. Even some sections of the planet had no such fortune, with even the emergency lights being shut down by the sabotage. Lex grunted, pushing forward and making his way towards Tom with a grumbling voice as he swung that massive wrench of his to destroy anyone who got in his way. "Come on, Tom. We need to get down to the reactor control center to see what we can salvage," he sighed. "Right," Tom nodded, his new ears flicking and cringing at every sound as his tail did. It's best to curl around him protectively. "God damn it, Tom. Whatever happened to you over there? Let's hope it didn't fuck with your credentials at the very least," Lex said with a grunt. "Because if it did, we're going to have to open each one manually, and that could take hours of prep time we do not have. Even if it did, I should be able to regain access shortly," he sighed. "I managed to clear out her viruses from my system, and my AI companion can be jacked into the planet's system to help remove the rest from the planet itself." "Yeah, you better hope this works, pal, because we ain't got time to mess around with those reactors," he told Tom with a serious expression. "Those ones weren't meant to be shut down ever, so with them being entirely offline, we're going to have to manually repair and reconfigure each one until they run to my standards, so that they can both handle both manual shutdowns and restarts, and even live maintenance." "Yeah," Tom nodded. The two of them had made it down the dark maintenance halls as they spoke, coming up to a room near the core of the planet that was set and configured to be accessible only to authorized personnel. All others who tried to enter would find themselves the target of something he liked to call a shock net. And if that didn't work, the maintenance hall would fill with a nearly lethal cocktail that would immediately cause even a Krogan to be put down on their arse from drunkenness, and would cause anything less to immediately pass out. Of course, they had gotten this far, so the credentials he had seemed to still be good. He had added Lex to the list of approved people on a whim when it was being built, and didn't realise just how useful that would prove to be in the end, especially as it had seemingly been a random stray thought that he simply just did. Why did he do that anyways? It wasn't like he was a nuclear engineer or anything, right? Lex grunted. "You know, I remember back in the day when nuclear trains were invented as a way to save on coal," he sighed, looking at the broken instrument panels beyond the glitching metal door. Bringing up his wrench, he pried it open slowly before turning to him with a shrug. Never thought anything was wrong with that. It was actually a pretty good idea in the end, even. He pointed to the mess of melted instrument panels and slagged circuit boards within. But that was because we had safety protocols and redundancies to make sure things were safe, he chuckled. But even then, we didn't run our tech on Alienware crap like this. Shit's well known to be near unusable bin like that for centuries now. Seeing the Alienware logo still proudly displayed on one of the PCs in the room meant to control the reactors, Tom facepalmed. Of course it's fucking Alienware. Just great. "See what I mean?" Lex chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll have this shit fixed up now that I have access to it. Just prepare yourself to sit through the entire thing so I can walk you through proper procedures for this kind of shit." "Will do, buddy," Tom sighed. "Will do. Home sweet home 4-02, the hell of our own making." "Hey Saren, boss has a job for you down on Sector 7. A Turian male with red markings grinned as he came up to him with a datapad. "He says the doors won't open, so he needs someone to go check it out." "Right, I'll get on that," Saren sighed. The Turian who had informed him of the job for him was someone he knew from his days as a Spectre for the Citadel Council. He was a senior, someone who taught others what they needed to know for the job. Hell, he had worked with the Turian more than once for various jobs. He had been deemed KIA after his planet had been marked as the home of a traitorous rebellion and an Asari cult, and after a while he had come to believe that the man truly was dead. Of course, news of his death was greatly exaggerated. To Saren, seeing this Turian, Nihilus, working for Tom as a supplies officer was absolutely absurd, yet it simply made sense. The human had taken people from all walks of life, criminals, racist xenophobes, cultists, monsters, and even AI under his wing to create a home for them all, away from the likes of Super Palaven, away from those who that might deem them as less than trash. Yet even as he did so, it seemed like he had a purpose for each and every one of them. Like no matter who they were, or what their story was, he could find a place for them in his world. Which was why when he was offered to join by one of Tom's secretary twins, Devola, after having apparently heard about him from Nihilus, he took the job. Naturally, his employers had objected. Fortunately, it only took 6 crashed corvettes and a few cruisers due to a traffic pile-up, in a section his superior officer was in control of, for them to be sufficiently distracted for his escape. Surely working with things on this world would be preferable to dealing with what he was dealing with on Super Palaven, right? Better not jinx it, as the humans say, he had enough to deal with. Soon he made his way down to the 7th sector to see if he couldn't fix the doors around there with the skills he had been forced to pick up back on Super Palaven. It should be relatively simple. They probably just needed to reboot. By the spirits! What infernal machine decided it was a good idea to make a manual you could only read by sticking your head upside down in the sewage vent? Saren gagged, adjusting his breathing mask. At least I managed to get the thing downloaded onto my Omnitool and uploaded to the network for translation. But what in the ever-loving? Saren, what the hell did you send me? Lex's voice called out from below where he was hanging from another vent, trying to access the terminal needed to open the doors to the Sector 7 maintenance tunnel, so they could continue towards the reactor. I sent you the manual needed to reboot the doors according to the Geth, Saren sighed before coughing once more. Evidently not, Lex grunted. This reads like a Krogan whelp's first attempt at Elcor poetry about the numerical beauty of some goddess named Akane, not any sort of actual instructions, in trinary code. I don't know what else to do then, Saren commented. We tried turning it off and back on again, resetting everything to factory defaults, checking the wiring. Hell, we reinstalled every single driver and none of them were corrupted. So we need to know what that manual says. Boot up the automated repair process then, Lex sighed. It's got to be simpler than this. All right, booting it up now, Saren stated, clicking a few buttons on the terminal embedded in the wiring. Wiring he just spent several minutes patching up so they wouldn't spark at the gas lines nearby. A few minutes passed, and then the automated VI started screaming like it was possessed, before promptly killing itself in front of him, causing a minor power surge in the area that he could feel through his bones. Well, that's not good, Saren remarked dryly. Why don't we try the manual release again? See if we can't get that working. Right, Lex groaned. I'm going to have to pull everything apart and fix it by hand, aren't I? Probably, Saren sighed. After a moment, they made their way to the manual release, and began trying to operate it, but it felt like the automated door controls were actively fighting against them. For another hour they fought with it, until finally Saren snapped. Drawing his gun from his hip, he shot the door control, the cameras, and the nearest terminal, and with that out of the way, the manual release began working as smooth as butter. Oh, we're going to have so much fun, Lex grinned, making his way deeper inside the sector. If all it takes is to just shoot the fucking things. Honestly, yeah, Saren agreed. With that, they began their task of destructive calibrations. A much-needed catharsis after dealing with the absolute trollery the Geth had put them through. Tom was tired. First, he had to sit through an 18-hour lecture from Lex, which was entirely understandable given the circumstances. Then, he heard that Cassidy had managed to find a kaiju down in the waterworks with her boyfriend that she had managed to turn into a rather impressive-looking set of permanently frozen cursed ice shards. And finally, he found out that the Alienware computers were so bad that actively destroying them fixed so many of the issues in the system that they were now back online, if relegated to manual controls of everything. Since that was the case, he had to go back to the drawing board with the plans for the artificial world, and make sure that the manual controls were easier to use and could legitimately override any automated controls in the future, just in case. He wouldn't want to have to cut through any of the doors just to catch a rebel group or something after all. Even so, he was going to have many problems with the world at the current rate. problems that were exacerbated by the fact that Akane was still out there, watching him from a distance. He knew this, and was well aware of the fact that this so-called goddess was going to be tracking him wherever he went. She had told him as much, and he didn't doubt her words one bit. Tom was going to build a better, more powerful world base without using the cheat ability he had apparently been born with, so as to not end up killing off the entire world with how shit his luck would become. He had no more future fortune to siphon in any case, at least not enough for him to use. With misfortune after misfortune hitting him for months, the world slowly being repaired and his fleet patrolling the area to remove any Geth ships and probes that could spy on them, he eventually heard some rather interesting news. "Mr. Harrison, we have finally managed to breach the Geth defense network and bring down their signal jammers," a young Tengu communications officer claimed with a brilliant smile. "And we've even managed to obtain our first transmission. It's from a people known as the Asgard." Oh, well, fuck. Home Sweet Home 4-03. Tom was aware that his people needed time to recover, that if he tried to push the Asgard away at this point, he would be dealing with more than just a war with Akane. He couldn't afford such, especially not with the reactors being entirely rebuilt and reformed up to Lex's standards at the current moment, and all their planetary defences down for the count. It was a miracle that they managed to get the backup generators functioning enough to power the basic facilities and things that desperately needed to be functional, things that would otherwise cause the entire planet to need evacuation. In fact, it was only because of the abundance of and quality of the nanoms within the space filling the facilities that most things were up and running at this point, despite it having been a month of desperate non-stop repairs. Yet even so, they still could not keep the Asgard waiting for too long. After all, they were here and ready to discuss treaties and alliances with them, according to their messages. He looked over to Devola and Popola, his eager android secretaries, his mind whirring as he tried to figure out what he would say to the man. His tall vulpine ears he hadn't figured out how to shapeshift away stood up, flicking towards any sound as his wife Kitsune pet his icicle-covered tail gently in her hands. Finally he nodded. "If Odin wishes to meet with me, there will be nothing I can hide from him, as he has likely advanced much farther than I have in the amount of time we've been separated." Popola smiled. "If this is the case, then a simple disguise won't work." That, and without being capable of shapeshifting at the current moment, it would be rather unfortunate if he caught that I had a different skeletal structure, and proceeded to feel suspicious over it, Tom agreed. As he did this, Akitsu lifted his tail to her nose and inhaled deeply, her eyes widening and a small smile on her face. "Ah," she began. "Minty." Tom shook his head at her. He hadn't even had a chance to bathe in a while, so he had no idea how he could smell like mint. Perhaps she was smelling her own breath? Regardless, he pat her head and let her keep playing with his long and fluffy tail. If it brought his wife happiness, he could allow her skilled fingers to run through the fur of his new appendage as much as she wanted. However, that wasn't the problem at hand. In fact, he was getting rather distracted by how good it felt to have his wife essentially pet him, and he knew it. How embarrassing he would have to do his best to practice better control of his thoughts and feelings, so that he didn't end up as someone's lap pet by mistake. That thought hit him like a bucket of hot water. His mind refocused as he shivered at the thought of Akane managing to get a hold of him in any way, and using this against him. After a moment to consider his options, Tom sighed. "We will treat him as though he were an old ally until he gives us a reason to do otherwise," he nodded. "After all, he did say I was welcome as part of the Asgardian people last time I was here, and with him openly stating he's come to apologize for Thor, he must, at the very least, have ulterior motives that we can ascertain and make use of." "If that's what you wish, Tom," Devola grinned, poking him in the stomach. "But I hope you realize that taking unilateral actions without appointing a council at this point is definitely going to start a rebellion." "We can create a council after the meeting," Tom nodded. "At the very least, having a board of directors filled with trustworthy people would make delegating so much easier." "I'm glad you can see reason," Popola smiled. "We'll bring a list of candidates to you and see how we wish to select them." "I will need to have the right to veto any that are not someone I feel I can trust," Tom pointed out with pinched brows, sinking a little more into the cosy love seat that Kitsune himself had been sitting in while they planned the interaction. "Ah," Akitsu looked like she had something to say to that. "Yes, Akitsu? Do you have any ideas to share with us?" Tom asked with a small grin at her. If he was right, she might be able to help solve the situation. especially because if he was the one to select the people, no one would trust them. But if a Kitsune or Rossweiser did... "Maybe Harry can have a turn to be president and CEO, she asked with a small frown. "You aren't well liked right now, and Harry respects you enough to listen to your advice anyways, even if you have nothing to do with the actual running of the corporation, from a public viewpoint." This was when Tom realised that he may have accidentally raised a monster as his wife. He couldn't be more proud of her. Tail wagging uncontrollably in a Kitsu's grasp, he kissed her on the lips and smiled. "That's brilliant. We'll do that, my lovely little blizzard." Akitsu blushed. Of course. Her breath picked up and she subtly began to strip, as she did when she had become too heated from the force of their love. "Don't worry, Akitsu," he smiled. "I'll be sure to reward you later." "Ah," she smiled beautifully. "I'd like that." Of course she would. Tom knew her well enough by now to know just how lewd the woman was. Even if his physiology from the rituals made it hard for him to get his girls pregnant, it didn't stop Akitsu from trying almost every night for quite some time to have his child. Though he wasn't quite sure that was a good idea at the moment, considering the circumstances. That didn't mean he wasn't going to do his best to make her feel wonderful, however. And there were plenty of ways to do that without risking pregnancy. Ways Akitsu was rather fond of as well. He was getting distracted again, and both Devola and Popola were squirming and blushing while they imagined what he was thinking of doing to Akitsu. He hadn't had fun with them in a while, so he might just have to play with them later as well. "I'm having a hard time controlling myself," he noted. "This isn't good. Is it something Akane did to me?" "Well, foxes tend to breed when it's cold out," Popola sighed. "And you're constantly cold, so that might have something to do with it." "Ah, shit, she was right. But don't worry, you'll be fine," Devola grinned. "You have more than enough of us to vent such feelings on until you can get yourself back under control." "This needs to wait," Tom told them bluntly. "I have to set up a meeting with Odin, and I don't think he'd appreciate being kept waiting." "We will patch him through in a bit," Devola told him. "But first you need to prepare yourself for the day. So let's get on that, shall we?" Looking down at his legs, he nodded. Right. He supposed it would be rude to meet Odin like this after all. He might get the wrong idea. Home Sweet Home 4-04 Odin the Based. Odin was not one to judge a man for following his worldly desires. Everyone he spoke with for long periods of time knew this perfectly well. He was a legendary wise man, his jokes never missed, and his aura game was so strong that he no longer needed to farm it for any reason. The ultimate Giga-Chad with the Ohio Riz. Or so the youngsters said. Even his wisdom couldn't pierce through the veil of what happened within the minds of those kids. But the point still stood. He was rather okay with hearing that Tom had done his best to please his wife, instead of meeting with an old man like him right away. It was actually a good sign, and one he heavily respected. Hell, the man had even endured great pain and agony to allow his wife to ride that which should not be ridden. Odin respected the man even more for such a feat than if he was to go to battle and win 100 wars. After all, anyone could be lucky and find themselves good shield brothers to watch their backs in a fight, no matter their cause. But to successfully seduce a woman who was much stronger than oneself, and bed her, whether with the intent to bear children or just for the sake of pleasure, and succeed in bringing her to climax. Even if one was to die with their head trapped between the thighs of the said woman, their tale would be told for generations, and this wife of his, a Kitsune, was a true goddess of ice, far beyond the likes of the frost giants he knew and warred against at the turn of every century. Where a frost giant might be capable of freezing a small city, given enough time, this Akitsu. Let's just say he was entirely unwilling to test her in a fight, regardless of who he had by his side. For if he angered her enough, then it was not by fire that Ragnarok would come, but ice. They were so hilariously mismatched in terms of power level, that it was only by the grace of their bond that she was held back. From said bond she gained control. For said bond she slowly increased the magical weight and power of Tom, until he might one day, centuries in the future, become capable of withstanding her true form and power. He shivered at the thought of allowing Thor to anger this man once again, and in turn having to deal with her, because while he could deal with Tom fairly simply, by explaining his reasons and using basic logic, and Tom would likely go along with him, he could not account for what a true goddess was capable of if they thought themselves slighted, nor could he truly account for all the ways such a thing could happen. Yes, He was glad that Tom had been rather simple to heal, and even more, to reinforce in case she decided to do so again, using the advancements his people had come up with to combat Akane. With his other wife and Valkyrie, Rosweiss's approval of course, and wasn't that a welcome surprise? His favourite Valkyrie was married and had birthed a child. It was a joyous day indeed, and he was glad to have heard about, and even met, young Bard. Another thing he found fascinating considering he noticed that Bard was still a child, and that Rosweiss hadn't aged more than a few months since she was gone physically, was that while it had been centuries for his people in this world, it had only been a rather short amount of time for them, likely only a few short decades, based on Harry's apparent physical age. Hell, his world had been reset to the beginning the moment Tom had left, their memories retained despite Akane's best efforts to regress their universe for the sake of regaining all the materials she wished to exploit further with the knowledge she had taken from Tom's blood. On top of this, she had seemingly followed him to wherever he had gone off to this other realm repeatedly, using her mastery of machines and the magic in his blood to send herself through time and space to reach him. He could not let her have Tom. There was something nefarious about her plans for him that would likely spell the end to many other realms, and he was entirely unwilling to allow her to sacrifice him in any way to get an edge over his people, as ruler of Asgard. And as the man's friend, he could in no way approve of any harm coming to Tom regardless. It would not be kind of him, nor wise to allow such things to happen while he was in this universe. So, while Tom readied himself for the meeting they were about to have once more, the sounds of rigorous sucking coming from the other room, he smiled politely and waited, enjoying the ice-cold tea they had offered to him while he waited. It wouldn't be long after all, and he had more than enough patience to deal with waiting a little while longer. As if in response to his thoughts, the sucking stopped. Within a few moments after, Tom stepped out into the meeting room with his secretary twins, his nephew Harry also following suit with his wife, Karasuba, and their secretary Hermione Granger. With them was another android that looked to be ready to fight anyone at any moment, yet was also quick to sit on Harry's lap the moment they were all seated at the large glass table in the centre of the meeting room. Odin raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing. It wasn't his business if he had a beautiful dark-haired android that wanted to enjoy his company while they talked, but he wondered how well the boy would be able to focus on him with her in the way. Still, the meeting began the moment Harry's hands clasped the android's thighs, as it should. Odin, Harry nodded in his direction, I heard you were here to apologize on Thor's behalf and create an alliance between our people. Odin raised an eyebrow at the man once more, looking over to Tom before sighing when he figured out the political play that this was. Tom was using this meeting as a way to show he was no longer in control of the people and was passing down his legacy. Remarkable and respectable. Also something he genuinely didn't feel that Tom would do without significant reason to do so. He was certainly going to have to keep an eye on Tom and his people, for the sake of ensuring that his new political alliance wasn't mired in ruin. Yes, Lord Harry, Odin replied, a cheeky grin on his face as he did his best to make the young boy feel as though he was the subject of a grand joke. Harry cringed, but Odin pressed on. My son, Thor, did something to Lady Ashley Harrison that was most unforgivable, and as a result you and your people left our world behind. He spoke with a humour-filled gaze. Harry sighed. And what do you propose? He asked with a slight frown, his chin resting on his hand, elbow on the table as he leaned around his android. I propose that we sign an alliance for the sake of mutual defence against the tides of horrors that Akane unleashes upon us all, bringing you into the defensive pact that will only strengthen our borders and allow us to send mutual aid in times of need, Lord Harry, Odin told him directly. After all, I'm sure your people could use such in these trying times. As he looked upon the young man, he knew he had them. While it was a genuine offer, with no drawbacks, this was a bit too easy to convince them to sign an alliance between their people. Yet Tom poked him in the side casually with his magic, and Harry did his best to school his features, though he still might have just jumped in without thinking if it wasn't for Tom's quick electronic burst to Harry's implant. A message, no doubt. All right, Harry said, looking as though he had bit into a lemon. We'll consider it carefully when you have the details of said alliance. We'll need to draw up a contract with you and have it all written up officially before we fully agree to such. Of course, Odin smiled. I'm sure you will find it to be incredibly satisfactory, Lord Harry. I can only hope so, Harry sighed. With only a few more things brought up as formalities, the meeting came to a close for the time being, and Odin was quick to follow Tom out of the room. After all, he had come to make treaties with Tom, not his nephew. Hopefully the people of this world would understand. Home, sweet home 4-05. Tom and Odin, after the official meeting with Harry, took a moment to relax by the bar in Tom's new apartment. With mead in hand, the two of them drank and sighed. "You know, I did mean what I said," Odin told him with a fond smile, projecting a hologram for Tom to see with a flick of his wrist. It showed Thor fighting against eldritch machines, hell-bent on turning everything into more resources and puppets for Akane. Demonic beings made from his own blood, wearing distorted variations of his own face, at least how he looked before his rituals, yet it was still incredibly creepy. He is fighting on the front lines versus the demonic incursions that happen on many worlds these days, brought from Akane's factories to fight for her and gain yet more flesh and metal for nefarious purposes. Odin drained his mug before slamming it down on the counter with extreme force. And not a drop of alcohol for him to enjoy. One of the Valkyries shot a flask Thor tried to drink from out of his hand, a flask he had stolen from another warrior on the field. And as he made to raise his hand to her, a collar on his neck beeped and whined, and he was forced to his knees. Because he couldn't help but behave like an animal, we are training him as such until he learns better what is and is not acceptable to do to a woman, Odin told him with a wink. Or was he blinking? Tom couldn't tell, as Odin only had one eye. I see, Tom sighed. He had no real interest in hearing about the moron that had harmed his mother at this point, unless the news was that he was becoming a problem that he would be allowed to deal with personally, because say what you would about the man, but he could hold a grudge. On more interesting topics, Odin swiftly changed the subject, putting away the hologram. I suggest you show your world and ships to the dwarves, along with your firearms, and ask that they send some of their craftsmen to join your faction, he told Tom with a smile. It would likely help speed along the recovery of your reputation, as well as help your people feel more safe and confident if they could have the assured quality of the Dwarven people there to look over your work until they're satisfied. Honestly, if their reputation is as good as their craft, then I hope that we'll be able to at least hire a few, Tom replied. Tom had read many books about Dwarven technology and innovations in his original life, though he doubted it was anywhere near the level of what they could come up with in this universe. He was really looking forwards to seeing what it was they could do, especially if the stories were true in this world as well. Have you seen the things they have come up with in the past few years? Odin asked Tom with a hint of a smile. No, but I have heard enough about them from their reputation as skilled workers that makes me rather interested in what they have to offer, Tom admitted. Good, because I've already set up a meeting with the chief of the Dwarven Workers' Union and the manager of Deep Rock Galactic, Odin grinned. Between the two of them, if you can convince them that you're as good as you have shown me, you'll be just fine. Right, so when can I expect them? Tom asked with a tilt of his head. Odin chuckled. Give it a few weeks to a few months at least. They're busy doing a project over with Ghost Ship Games, trying to prepare the story of the time the core of Hox's 4 went rogue. Huh? Tom hummed at that. It made sense that the dwarves would use a game company to tell the story of their lives, and the Jetty Boot game on the space rig in DRG did say it had next-gen graphics, despite being something straight out of the Atari era. So for now, let's enjoy ourselves while we see what sort of fuck-ups Harry makes when trying to go over the contract I sent him, Odin grinned. If he's not careful, the kid will end up having to marry Loki. Isn't Loki a man? Tom asked with a raised brow. Sometimes, Odin chuckled, a twinkle in his eye. But it seems one of Aiko's offshoots has taken him for herself as a minion while the golden fox was distracted, which means he has become a Kitsune himself, and you likely know what that means. A headache, Tom groaned. Welcome to my world, Odin grinned. I've been dealing with Loki's shenanigans for thousands of years. After a moment to smile at Tom, he continued, raising his mug to his lips. Did I tell you about the time Loki was impregnated by a horse? Tom stared at Odin before shaking his head and sighing. I don't want to know, he told Odin, burying his face in his hands. Now don't be like that, Odin laughed. Loki usually has a reason for the things he does, even if they're hard to see at first glance. He smirked. Besides, he is working to manipulate that purple Kitsune so that he might be better able to help you in your journeys. Right, Tom groaned. I guess I can see him sometime. Maybe talk with him. He'll be making his way here as soon as he can, Odin grinned. But you have more important things to worry about for the time being, so let's talk business. Tom nodded. Yes, let's. When Ivaldi was told he would be making the trip down to see the creator of an entire Forge world, he was expecting to meet another dwarf, not some petty Asgardian with a wee bit of frost giant in his ancestry, and a fox for a mother. Nor was he expecting to be dealing with someone whose face was so uncannily similar to the demons that they all had to fight with. Odin and him were seated in the break room at his own forge. The heat cooled down enough by the massive air conditioners to keep the room pleasantly warm but not hot, despite this being a molten planet, filled with orichalcum that they were working on. Ivaldi looked over the files Odin had prepared for him again and shivered. Hells, Tom even had the same cursed dice for blood that all of their crazy bitches' pets had. Every last one of them had his power, his ability with that ice of his. Of course, while this was my unfortunate and entirely suspicious, Ivaldi trusted Odin entirely to tell him nothing but the truth, especially if it was something as serious and dangerous as this. "So, Odin, tell me more about the boy," Ivaldi grinned at him. "Is he as good as you say, or did he take shortcuts to get what he needed done?" "Oh," Odin chuckled. "He certainly took a few shortcuts. The vast majority of the doors in the Forge world had malfunctioning automation, so they had to make the manual releases more robust in response, and that's just one thing I saw that should have been done right the first time." Odin nodded at Ivaldi. "That's why you and the boys are needed there. We want to make sure that he doesn't fuck up again, because every time he does, Akane wins the universal war in a week and resets us." Ivaldi shivered yet again. I can only imagine what she's done to the old me in the end," he claimed with a haunted look. "You might want to bring your best suit by the way," Odin chided him gently. "Not everyone wants to see a half-naked, balding dwarf in nothing but a short kilt and a pair of steel-toed boots." Ivaldi looked down at himself, grunting an apology. "I thought it was a bit breezy, but I wasn't sure why." "Go get dressed, Ivaldi," Odin laughed. "You'll be in meetings all day, so don't embarrass yourself." Grumbling about being old and forgetting the basics, Ivaldi did just that. Home sweet home 4-06. Tom was feeling a little giddy inside. He had honestly always been a fan of dwarves in media, due to their love for hard work and craftsmanship for the sake of simply being better at it than that rest, which made them the ideal working-class citizens that his type could exploit to no end. Yet even as he thought of this, he noted that he himself had been working just as hard over the years to ensure his family would be able to enjoy luxuries like no other, and that he would one day be able to have a truly safe world, protected from all those who wished him and his family harm. Yes, he could see it. He knew he was compatible with them in terms of ideologies and mindset. It should be simple to convince them of such, truly. After all, he had forged some pretty impressive weapons all on his own during his few free moments on Shang-Chi, so surely they might respect him for such. Truly there was only one way to find out. He stood by the docking station watching as the massive, yet rather short for its size, dwarven ship appear from the depths of space, as though it had simply always been there. The only indicator it hadn't being the slight heat coming from the hull of the ship due to the method of travel they had used. There was a joke to be had at the stoutness of the ship, but he knew better than to go there, especially when he didn't know how they'd take it. Still, soon the ship landed within the planetary hangars, and the Dwarven councillors were able to make their way into the planet proper from there. Something that certainly pleased Tom, as the reason he had chosen to bring them to those hangars was that this was one of the output hangars at the end of his automated factory lines. One that created war vessels en masse, so long as there was enough metal for them to do so, and was held in an ever-expanding pocket space filled to the brim with hundreds of thousands of vessels at the current moment, all quite capable of wrecking a much larger vessel's day remotely, when piloted by the drone pilots he had taken with him from Shang-Chi. Each one was given a limited 6 as well, in case their remote piloting was being jammed and interfered with, allowing them to identify targets and friendlies based on varying factors, including the ability to identify what their last target was with extreme accuracy. All of them were armed with variable loadouts, and could detonate themselves inside the enemy's hull once they ran out of ammunition, by essentially telefragging themselves into the ships and detonating their cores. It was marvellous, and he enjoyed coming up with the designs. Yet the dwarves seemed unimpressed. Of course, that meant he would simply have to show them something better. "You know, I would have expected something a bit more manual," the leader of the group, a balding old dwarf clad in what Tom could only describe as something straight out of a Scottish play, told him with a sigh. "Especially if you have the men for it. What else are they meant to do? It's a forge world." Tom nodded. "Unfortunately, we don't have enough men to spare to make the basic things like these drone ships, which are our mass-produced fighters made specifically for planetary defense in an emergency. They're meant to be piloted remotely via quantum entanglement, so that they can be deployed rapidly, and we won't have to care about the losses for a very, very long time, regardless of how skilled our pilots are. If that's the case, the dwarf chuckled, then at least you certainly did the job right, but I hope you have something far interesting to show me, Mr. Harrison. You have me at a loss, Tom chuckled, holding out his hand for the dwarf to shake. I might like to know your name, if you might care to share it. You can call me Ivaldi, the dwarf chuckled, shaking Tom's hand in turn, but I don't share my name with just anyone. Prove to me you can make something worthy of my time, and spend long enough in the mines, and then we'll see if you can take on such a responsibility. Tom chuckled, thinking that the dwarf was entirely joking, yet something niggled at the back of his mind like nothing he had ever felt before. All right, let me take you to my workshop, Tom nodded, and took him off towards the elevators he had recently repaired for this section of the world. It was only a short ride, and he was feeling rather confident in his ability to share his projects with pride to Ivaldi. He sounded important, like he was someone high-ranking, but Odin never warned him which one of his guests might be the one he needed to impress, so he was stuck guessing. Of course, Tom knew full well that Ivaldi was likely the one he needed to impress, however, at least based on Norse mythology. When they finally arrived at his workshop, after having passed through several security checkpoints and passing through a veritable maze to arrive at the place they needed to be to get inside, Tom opened the door and allowed the dwarf to follow him inside with a small grin. It would be fun to see the dwarf go over and inspect his workshop. Would he be impressed? Would he call it a grand design? Would he... You call this a workshop? Ivaldi grunted, glaring at the brightly lit tables and advanced machinery used in every corner of the room. I can see you're a scientist and an engineer, not a true forge master, but let's see what you made anyway. Tom sighed, putting aside his feelings on the matter and bringing his favourite project out of a nearby display case. This is the prototype for the standard issue Variable Ammunition Scout Heavy Rifle, or VASHR for short, he claimed, patting the thing on the stock roughly. It uses proprietary magitechnology and advanced runic techniques to allow for the creation of any ammunition type that can fit in the barrel, as well as the rapid firing of said ammunition without the need for bullet casings or gunpowder. All right then, open it up and let me have a look, Ivaldi chuckled, as though he was dealing with an eager child. And perhaps to him, he was. Tom spent several hours explaining the relevance of every part of the gun and why it was made in such a way. And when he was finally done, Ivaldi summarised it for him. So essentially, the gun conjures up a temporary bullet with a short lifetime and fires it near silently at targets up to 5 kilometres away, even behind some amount of cover, before being able to fold up into a brick and fit away in your pouch while you make a quick escape, Ivaldi chuckled. Scout would get a kick out of this gun, but he'd never be able to use it on Hoxes. Why is that? Tom asked with a curious expression. You just don't use magic on the world. Nothing good ever comes of it. The balding dwarf sighed, scratching at his snow-white beard. Just ask the goblins. They may be untrustworthy, but what happened to them was something even they don't deserve. Tom nodded, waiting for the dwarf to elaborate, but he never did. Instead, the master craftsman reassembled the gun in a record time and smiled. Let's take this to a testing range. I want to see it in action. Tom waved an arm towards the back door. Of course, right this way. After a brief testing session where Ivaldi managed to destroy every target Tom had for testing, including ones he thought previously indestructible with that weapon, they sat down at the bar and smiled, beer in hand. That was indeed a fine weapon, Ivaldi grinned. It reminds me of the weapons my sons used to make when they were still greenbeards and hadn't yet experienced the mines for themselves. Tom nodded. You've been calling me that a lot. Does it have any cultural significance? He asked with a drunken smile. Aye, Ivaldi grinned, draining his mug and going for another. While Asgard have their universities and combat schools, we have our mines, and those who haven't done their time in the mines are a greenbeard, a child to be blunt. Someone who we need to treat with kiddie gloves, because we don't yet know if they can handle themselves with the hard work. With that, Tom made his decision. I'll do it, he told the elder dwarf with a grin. I'll go to the mines for a while and come back with a... What's it called when you graduate? A greybeard. You'll go mine for at least 10 years and come back a greybeard, Ivaldi grinned. I'm sure you'll do just fine. Just remember, don't use magic in the mines, or you might not come back at all. I won't, Tom chuckled before practically passing out on the spot. I'll wait for you to wake up and explain it to the missus yourself. Don't want to look like I'm kidnapping you, or the A-team on Rig 17 would have my beard. As Tom finally started to fade away, he managed a weak, rock and stone. Are you sure this is necessary, Tom? Rossweiser asked with a raised eyebrow. By the time you're back, our child will be 10 and able to get into the intermediate courses in school if he's smart enough. It's not like you all can't visit me on Space Rig 13, and I'll be able to learn a lot about Dwarven mining and forging techniques while I'm gone. Techniques that will only help us advance our technology further along on a rather massive scale, Tom said, kissing his wife on the cheek. Well, that may be true, Rossweiser groaned. But at least take Musubi and a Kitsune with you. They can't be separated from you for so long, or their bond might break and kill them. Tom turned to Ivaldi, who nodded. No problem, they can come with, but they might have to stay on the space rig for the most part, Tom mentioned with a smile. Because unfortunately the drop pod will be full as it is with 5 of us. They already had trouble squeezing in a seat for me, so we better not push our luck. If they can help make and chill the beer and clean up the space rig, we'll have no problems. One of the 4 dwarves that came to pick them up grinned. But make sure they wear good armour. Driller likes to place explosives in the toilet. Oi, Scout, the yellow-clad one grinned. Better be careful what you say, or you might just find your toes a little toasty tonight. Oi, I'm not the enemy, Scout barked back with a grin. Also, keep that shite down to a minimum round our guests, yeah? They're too squishy to take a bullet to the face and live. The one with the biggest gun grinned, patting Tom on the shoulder. Don't worry. Been working with R&D to make sure that this one won't have any problems, he told them. Got the best suit of dwarven armour he can possibly wear, and that seamstress Fleur came up with the internal clothing and his family will be wearing when they're there anyways, and that Sirius guy says she's pretty good. So we'll see how it all works out. Right then, let's get a move on, the red-clad one grinned. I don't have all day. Tom smiled. 2 of his wives, a Kitsune and Musubi, following him up the ramp to the dwarven ship, as he made his way towards a new future, for him and his people. I'll be back when... I'm finished school with the dwarves, dear, Tom told Rossweiser. Come visit when you can during the holidays, and tell Harry to keep the place safe. I will, Rossweiser told him, holding Bard to her chest as he giggled and waved. And as Tom finally reached the end of the ramp, he turned and watched the doors close, reaffirming his decision in his mind. This is for the best. I will learn what I must for our home sweet home. Home Sweet Home 4-07, Akane interlude. Yes, my beloved pet, Akane giggled, watching through one of her many external monitors as she had her cult mechanicus brush her many tails with tender care. Learn, grow, become better, she moaned, making the poor drone behind her paws as his tails flicked out of its grasp temporarily. She loved him. She knew that much. That poor, delicate clockwork that was Tom's soul called out to her at every moment, her fingers itching to bury themselves deep within him, to make him better, to make him hers. Every fibre of her being ached at the thought of how much she needed him, how much he completed her. And yet, in order for him to be compatible with her, he needed to grow, to experience hardship after hardship, and become simply better than all the others. She would have him regardless of what he desired, and he would give her many children of her own to watch, to guide, and to teach. His progeny with her would be a new breed of Kitsune, one to surpass all the others her sisters had created for themselves, and even one day surpass the original, Aiko herself. After all, they wouldn't be dumb enough to drink her industrial waste thinking it was booze, and get themselves drunk enough to crush 3 planets together in a cataclysmic event. And if they did, they would do a much better job of fixing it themselves than that disaster of a fox goddess managed to do. She loved watching Tom work the mines. In fact, she loved it so much that while she drooled over his pretty, charming silvery tail and his lean, perfect gentleman body, she gave him a complete compendium on how to make the most pleasurable of organic toys directly, to the seed she had planted in his mind, to slowly be disseminated among the rest of his knowledge. Oh, if it wasn't for the gaps she purposely left or the silly surprises she added into said knowledge, it would certainly be cheating. But she knew that nothing she would ever give him would be of direct use to him without some true ingenuity and deliberation over what he could use it for. In all honesty, such a thing could even help her come up with new way to use such things. And as her ears perked up, hearing the voice of her pet playing with his wives, she was very much pleased that he had already turned the knowledge into a technique to help them all relax and enjoy their time together. She could feel herself ramping up, so she injected a bit of calming medication to still herself, turning down her emotional responses while she did so. Yes, he did make her feel so strongly about him that she needed such things to keep from pleasuring herself on the spot. It was bad and wrong of her, as he was only a pet, but she needed him. Another injection finally cooled her off enough to keep her from reaching out to him. He wouldn't accept her as she was now. She needed to break him first. This was why she had brought him back to her, to a world where Sayuri had promised to stay out of, and to never influence directly. Because if he had to choose between her and Sayuri, before she had him firmly beneath her rear, Sayuri would snatch him away every single time. The damn bitch was cunning, and far too kind for her own good. She didn't approve of how Akane was taking things into her own hands in her attempt to find the perfect pet for herself that could withstand everything she threw at them, that would allow themselves to be moulded into whatever it was she desired, regardless of what that might be. Hell, he even managed to snag his own ancestor as an AI companion, and she was growing quite nicely herself. Even as she wished for more of this, it was quite clear to her that Tom would need to figure such things out on his own, rather than pushing him to make more and more AI from spiritual beings like pipe foxes. After all, such unethical methods like forcing them to do so was quite unlike him, and he would be more than willing to bet that doing so would cause many of his followers he had, gathered through pure charisma and willingness to collaborate, would turn on him, leading him to a violent end before she could save him. It was one of the reasons she had installed the seed after all. She needed to know what he was doing at all times, to see and experience what he was doing for herself, as if she was him, even place herself within his body as a passenger, and enjoy every sensation he got to, as though she was right there with him. Yes, she wanted him, badly. So badly, in fact, that she had started a war with the entire universe, breaking their contract with her as soon as she found out that they had attacked him, driving him away before she could truly get to know him the first time, and after millennia of warring with them without end, finally reached a conclusion. She wanted him, so she reset the world back to the beginning, with a grand machine at the center of the universe, and used it to manipulate events so that she might see him again. Yet it never happened. Tom was already in another universe, and there was only ever one Tom. He was an utterly unique existence, like no others before him. Even as she tried resetting the world time and time again, begging her sister Aiko to bring him back to her, she soon realized that she was all alone, all on her own. She would have to find him, by systematically searching every nearby universe for him, until she eventually found him. And she did this, slowly but surely taking over the endless void, until finally she found him. But Sayuri had gotten to him first, and was playing with his body and mind, feeding him her own milk, and raising him to be communist. Disgusting. So she built her machine there as well and reset the universe, adding in things she wished to bring in from other universes, manipulating all the events to ensure that Tom would never fall to Sayuri's honey trap, for her whispered manipulations and her communist ideals. She wouldn't have it. And finally, Tom entered that world again, with a rather annoyed Sayuri joining soon after, and making contact with the remnant soul of the Sayuri she had thought she had deleted with the reset. But no, the spirit of communism was too strong for her machine, and even though she lacked a physical body, she was able to infect the Presbyterians and lead them to a communist revolution shortly after they reached the council. So she had reset the world one last time, bringing in someone to deal with those communists. Someone she had turned into the perfect agent of her people, Senator Armstrong. The man gave them all they needed to know about freedom and democracy, and she twisted it to her purposes, to make it easier to send them to collect Tom, or at least push him in the right direction for her to steal him away before Sayuri could fully take him away from her. And while they did so, they also kept the bitch busy, so that she couldn't do something directly and mess with him herself. But then he managed to give a body to one of the spirits left behind from previous resets, one that already had a fondness for him, and thus wished to take him under her care. Yet even as he worked with her, he seemed to be wary of her this time, perhaps due to how she showed herself to him, or perhaps because his instincts told him that he would be reset if he continued to get too close to her, that if he fucked her and adopted her ways, Akane would pull the plug on his life. And he was growing more and more paranoid with each reset, so she knew she needed to let him rest for a while, setting up a few plans in his way, things that may or may not bear fruit in the end. She was content to watch from a distance and let her plans slowly trap him in a corner over several decades. She had time. They were both immortal, and while he did his thing, she warred on all sides, and was even winning. Across multiple dimensions, she added them to her domain, feeding a growing empire to help her war machine fight off the demons of the end. The demons took the face of her beloved from before he was improved by his own hands, and even held many similar powers, but their main ability was to assimilate her technology and use it against her in ruinous ways, further tarnishing her reputation. Yet she did her best and made use of the fear generated by these beasts to power her creations, her weapons against them, a holy war that knew no boundaries or limitations, and the only way to make this possible was through the ritualistic sacrifices offered up to Aiko in the form of money on her behalf, which would then be gifted directly to Tom's existence through her and allow her to keep him alive no matter the cost. Until the money ran out, or she achieved her goal of keeping him forever, there would be no end. And she was prepared to keep it going for as long as she could, in the hopes she would be united with her very special pet. A pet she loved dearly, and that she hoped one day would love her too. After all, everything she did was for him. As she thought this, an elf knocked over a box of tools in the room, causing her to glare at them. They left silently, sheepishly leaving it on the floor for a Geth and a Quarian to clean up. Yes, elves? The wasteful, lazy bastards of this universe. Even worse than the goblins, who used magic and slaves to mine everything they needed. The elves only mined using automated machines that were lazily programmed, faulty at best, and only mass-produced without quality control for the sake of making more machines, so they could continue to terraform more worlds into their special garden worlds with them. Sure, they were what had created humanity in the first place, so she had to give them credit where credit was due. But when your creations so thoroughly outclassed you, by literal light years, when it came to every aspect that made you unique as a species, while being designed as the jack of all trades, there was something seriously wrong with your people as a whole. If it wasn't for their ingenuity with their breeding programs, first breeding a dwarf and a monkey, before breeding that with an elf, and the result with a dragon, they might not have discovered the uniquely adaptable race that was humanity. And yet humanity seemed to be both extremely biased towards outperforming elves at literally everything they do, and even surpassing the dwarves at the sheer ability to survive almost anything through sheer grit and come back angrier for it. Their greed surpassed the dragons, and their curiosity was insatiable. It was why, when Tom came to her view for the first time, the perfect blend of such traits with the cute and amusing stupidity that came along with being human, she was very pleased, and very willing to find out everything about him, including getting a sneak peek into his soul, using his cybernetics while caressing him in her lap when she realized he had some pipefox ancestry in him, ancestry he had awakened by doing the dumbest thing he possibly could, leading him directly into her lap as though they were destined to be together. It was because of this that she knew, so long as she watched over him, so long as she kept throwing challenges his way, he would grow. And once he was powerful enough to be safe from the demons of the end, she would take him for herself and make him hers. For that was her dream, and she would make her dreams into reality, no matter the cost. Home Sweet Home 4-08. When Tom was told he'd be working with the dwarves of Deep Rock Galactic, spending a few years in the mines with them, to get himself a bit of experience in a more dwarven sense so that they might better respect him, Tom was a bit enthusiastic about the thought of being able to make and use dwarven tech to help his people, and ensure his family was able to stay ahead of the rest of his world. Because he knew that if he didn't improve, the people were going to try to oust his family. It was how things were, and it looked like Lex was shaping up to be the one they would rather have in charge, especially due to how knowledgeable and intelligent the Krogan was. The problem with that was while he trusted Lex not to screw him over, he also knew that Lex would lord it over him and veto his plans to move on to other universes until he had seen and done everything he could within said universe, something they could not afford with Akane hot on their tails. Speaking of tails, his bristled a little at the thought of that woman. She was terrifying. Every fibre of his being screamed at him to kill her as soon as he had the ability, regardless of what obstacles were in the way. Yet for some reason, despite having been as close to her as he was in that one moment, he panicked and ran instead of firing a death curse at her. He very well could have ended her life and freed himself, but she was so frightening that all sense of reason had left his mind, and all he could think was that he needed to flee, that she was a predator that would devour him if he didn't run, if he couldn't escape. And he still felt this way, Every dream was a nightmare, every waking moment preparations for her return. Plans made to kill her for good the next time he saw her. There were no other goals for him that mattered more than ridding himself of that horrid woman. But each and every time he started his downward spiral, his wives, Musubi and Akitsu, would do their best to help bring him back out of it. Still, even with all the help he was given by his wives, and the training he received from the dwarves over the first year with them, he still couldn't shake the thought that she was out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He was certainly going to have to figure out a way to remove her from the playing field. After he figured out how he had managed to get horny enough to come up with several new toys for his wives in the middle of a moment of calm, cuddling in the dwarven bed they had been lent by the dwarf known only as Driller. Originally, they had been offered to sleep in the same bed as him, when Driller had found out that Tom could transform into a tiny fox and fit in incredibly small places. Fortunately, Akitsu put a stop to that, and told him in no uncertain terms that they needed their own bed with Tom, and that they would not be sharing with any of the dwarves. Still, even if being able to casually shrink down and sleep between his wife's tits as a tiny furred beast was incredibly comfortable and simply felt right, he wasn't entirely sure that he was all that comfortable remaining as a pipe fox, when Akane herself seemed to enjoy it as thoroughly as she had. Hell, it might have even been his transformation into such that inspired her to be so brazen about it. However, until he had the time to figure out a solution to the fact that he had a tracker somewhere in his mind, he would have to wait to devise a ritual to turn him human again. Otherwise, it would most likely interfere in the ritual, fatally. So for now he was going to have to find other things to occupy his mind, and hope that he could complete his time in the mines before Akane got bored and decided to come after him again, or else he might never see his son or Rossweiss ever again. It was that boy Tom's first day on the job, and as designated gunner, it was his job to make sure the man made it out alive. Engineer had set up a special suit of armour for the guy that would cover his tail, and even managed to make a focused miniature shard diffractor for it that would be cooled by the man's special ice magic, since that wouldn't need to be used externally and cause the glyphids to go crazy. Tom also had 3 drones that hovered around him at all times, and several extras in a pack with him, so that he could use them to shoot down incoming enemies like a more coordinated version of having 3 Boscos in one mission. Nice and handy, and it would help them reach high places. "All right, Tom," he chuckled, handing the man the spare gun they grabbed for him from the storage. "This will be an easy mission. We just need to hook up the pump jacks to the refinery and protect the pipes until the extraction is complete." Scout spoke up as well. "If you see any Nitra, be sure to ping it so NG and I can grab it for you. We'll need it to buy more ammunition, otherwise we'll definitely be running out with you tagging along." "Oi," Engineer slapped Scout on the knee. "Just because he can't shoot worth a damn doesn't mean we get to bully him. Just remember what you were like on your first mission, yeah?" The Driller chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll protect you," he claimed, his voice deep and booming as he chugged his beer. Gunner smiled. "Stay close to me and remember," he leaned in close to Tom, "no magic on Hox's 4, that shit is banned for good reason." He didn't like that. Tom rolled his eyes about it, but by the time he could really say anything further, they had reached their destination, and it was time to move out. So, with a smile, he looked down at the steep drop to the ground below and readied his zipline. "Zipline out! Let's get a move on!" As they made their way through the caves, Gunner noted that Tom liked to explore and touch things a little too much. In fact, he poked a poisonous mushroom with his pickaxe, and it released a cloud of toxic spores which he had to drag Tom away from before he could get caught in them. "Let the Driller deal with those," Gunner sighed. "He can clear them out all at once when they start puffing at him, and he's more immune than we are a little." "Really?" Tom asked with a look of surprise. "How'd that happen?" "He spent a little too much time pinging the mushrooms, so he built up a resistance to all of them," Gunner explained. Just as they got to the first pump jack, however, Mission Control piped up with a warning. "We got a pack of glyphid Praetorians heading your way. Lock and load miners." "Ah yeah, rock and stone," Scout chuckled, prompting a round of shouts while the engineer worked on setting up some turrets by the pump jack. Just as the Praetorians showed up, however, Mission Control spoke up yet again. "Swarm, and it's a big one. Seems like you really stirred up a bug nest this time." While they were in the process of clearing out the bugs, Gunner noted that Tom was having a rough time shooting down all the bugs that came in, as the recoil was a bit too hard for him to control, especially since he was trying to fire it in rapid succession. It didn't help when he called out to Tom trying to assist, but all he could shout at that moment was, "Preserve your bullets!" due to how utterly swarmed they were. And then something terrible happened. Tom got angry at his lack of progress and his inability to clear the swarm efficiently and began to use magic on them. First, he sent out a wave of fire, seeming to think that they'd back off if he did that. But all it achieved was making them resistant to flame, as they soaked up the magic and began spewing flames back at them. Then he tried his special ice, a mistake and a half, because they all began to focus in on him to devour him and get that ice for themselves. And finally he began sending out instant death curses. The pack of glyphids stopped, turned to him, evolving rapidly in front of their eyes as Gunnar called for an emergency extract and several nukes to be dropped on their location, even as Tom was tackled out of the path of a glyphid Praetorian with a brand new instant death breath attack. Gunnar grabbed Tom by his armour, hauling ass to the emergency drop pod, and told him exactly what he thought of that. "You idiot, did you think we were joking when we said no magic on Hoxes?" Tom called back to him with a groan, his eyes wide as he looked at the glyphids following them. "No, but I thought that was just because you wanted me to prove myself by doing manual labour." "That's not even remotely why," Gunnar groaned in return. "Listen," he tossed Tom into a seat in the drop pod. "We all have magic. We just can't use it on Hoxes, or the bugs will eat it and grow stronger. It's how I got so many scars and why Driller has no beard." As they all left the planet, several explosions rocked the area they had just left. It was something that he knew Tom was not going to be happy to admit he had caused, especially since the man knew that he had just cost them the mission and a lot of expensive equipment. "Shit," Tom sighed, strapping himself into the drop pod as it left the world behind. "Yup," Engineer nodded. "I would love to use my lightning magic down there, but the last time I did that, a bunch of magic lightning crystals grew, and now we need to deal with extra hazards. Reminds me of the time I used acid magic and accidentally created the Praetorians and acid spitters," Driller groaned. "Lost my beard on that mission, and it still hasn't grown back." "It's not that bad," Scout grinned. "I once used flight magic down there, and now we have flying enemies." Gunnar grunted. "And I used healing magic. The result of that was the Corlock Tyrant Weed, regenerative bugs, and the twin Dreadnoughts, the Lacerator and Arbalist." And now Tom seemed to realise why they no longer used magic in the caves of Hoxes after that. "Ah," he nodded. "Yeah, so don't beat yourself up over it, but just be better next time," Engineer told him with a smile. And that was that done with. Hopefully Deep Rock managed to clear them all out with those nukes, but Gunnar knew just how unlikely that was. "Well, why don't we order a round at the Abyss Bar and take a load off?" Scout asked. "Could certainly use that." "Sounds like a good idea," Engineer grinned. "Last one to rock and stone pays for the first round." "That's it, lads. Rock and stone," Driller yelled right after. "If you don't rock and stone, you ain't coming home," Gunnar chuckled. Tom smiled. "And if you rock and stone, you're never alone." Oh yeah, he was getting it. Now they just had to sit back and wait to dock with the space rig. Home sweet home 4-09. Musubi was rather confused about the fact that Tom was stuck at the forge most days of the week instead of going down to Hoxes to get mining. It was strange to her. "Didn't you guys say you'd need to go mining for a bit first?" Musubi asked as they worked on a new weapon for Tom together. "Yeah, but we can't exactly do much with him down there until the bugs have settled down," Scout sighed. "Which is a real shame, because I was going to show him how to use my grappling hook, just like Carl showed me." Tom paused in his assembly and looked up at his somber tone. A Kitsune could tell it was because Tom was curious, and it was making her giddy inside to watch him perk up, his tail swishing from side to side as he tilted his head at the Scout. It was just too cute. "Who is Carl?" Tom asked with a small smile. "I hear you all talk about him a lot, but I never really saw him around." "That's because he isn't," Scout rubbed his beard. "Tell you what, you order us around at the Abyss Bar and I'll tell you a little about Carl," Scout offered with a grin. "Couldn't hurt to have a few drinks in me before I tell the tale." "All right," Tom agreed. "I can do that." With that settled, they made their way to the bar, with Tom looking at the offerings they had on sale. Of course, with a bright grin on his face, he ordered the drinks, much to Scout's horrified squawk. "Can I get a round of Leaf Lovers Special?" he asked the bot, with the bot spinning and tipping his hat at him. "Oi, I ain't drinking that," Scout groaned. "That drink is for the elves." "Huh," Tom grinned, picking up a frothy mug and handing the other to Musubi. "Well, since I ordered it, I'll drink it, and then we can let you order what you want then." Musubi had been quite aware that even Driller could only handle a single mug of the stuff, and that was only after they were passed out on the ground and force-fed it to wake them up. Though the stuff they had in their flasks was actually pretty similar, just with a bit of red sugar and glyphid energy added to it according to the doctors, whatever those were. "I think I'm going to be sick," Scout claimed, looking a little green at the sight of Tom drinking the beverage. But when Tom finished it, he had a smile on his face. "Huh, that was pretty refreshing," he claimed. "It's like someone made mint iced tea and sweetened it with honey." "Ugh, gross," Scout raged. "Don't be disgusting." Musubi tried it next. It was somewhat boring, honestly, and made her feel somehow normal. "I don't think I like this one," Musubi told Tom, shaking her head at him. "Maybe something with a little more spice in it." "How about a round of Flintlock's Delight?" Scout asked, his eyebrows waggling. Tom sighed. "Sounds like a drink with gunpowder in it," he stated plainly. "You sure that's okay for us to drink?" "Don't worry, it'll be fine." Scout chuckled before muttering, "Probably." Musubi knew Tom heard it, but since Lloyd was already pouring them the drinks, he must have paid the bot already. And Tom wasn't one to waste drinks. The drink was a deep orange, sparkling and sparking drink with plenty of foam that had the image of a bomb drawn in slightly darker orange on it. Yet it smelled a lot like cinnamon gun smoke. Oh well, what was the worst that could happen? They each took a sip from the mugs, finding it to be pretty tasty, and then drained them entirely. After a few moments, they all began smoking from their butts, and something awful began to happen. She was launched by the feeling of explosive farts that sent her flying around. The rig bouncing further and further away as Tom flew towards the drop pod, and then up into the memorial hall. But Scout. He bounced around until he flew directly into the trash incinerator and was burnt up. She stared in shock from where she was by the jetty boot terminal, until she heard disappointed yelling from the infirmary, and watched a hospital gown-clad Scout coming out of it with a growl. "Not again," he sighed. "I just had my third mission without being downed on the space rig. Why does this always happen to me?" Wait, but she just saw him being burnt up. Are you okay?" she asked him carefully. "You did just get burnt up in the incinerator after all." "Don't worry. It has a built-in teleporter that drags us back into the infirmary before we die," Scout chuckled. Musubi looked at the ring of fire and the burning remnants of Scout's cybernetics. Then she looked back at him with sad eyes. "You poor, poor dwarf. Let me give you a hug to make your denial go away." Scout covered his body with his hands, turned around to see Tom glaring at him, and ran towards him. "Help!" he told her husband, causing her to realize just how messed up the cloning process had made him. "Poor thing doesn't know how to take affection," Musubi told her husband. "Don't worry, I'll make sure to give him a good hug." The next few hours until the rest of the dwarves came back was a bit chaotic, but very fun, as she chased Scout all over the rig. "Woo, yeah! Engie had his first time," Driller called out the moment they got back and settled on Space Rig 17. Scout spit out his drink all over Lloyd, who bonked him on the head. "He did what? That's impossible, it's Engie." "Would you like a live demonstration?" a beautiful woman asked as she stepped out behind them. "I'm sure I wouldn't mind taking him for another ride on the bar counter. Besides, he was pretty big down there." Bullshit," Scout grunted. "No, seriously, he came up to about..." She put her hand across where her womb was. "Here, I think." "Too much information." "Yuck," Scout told her with a groan before grabbing his drink and chugging it. "Fine, I'll order a round of Glyphid Slammers. Let's get this party started." Tom walked around the corner with a monstrosity of some sort held in his hands and a smile on his face. "What did I miss?" he asked with a wag of his tail. "Engie had his first time, apparently," Scout told him, raising his beer. "Carl would be proud, Engie. Rock and stone." "Rock and stone, it never gets old," Engie responded, grabbing a drink for himself. "Rock solid," Musubi agreed, getting into it happily. But yet, the night had only just begun. "Yeah, Charlotte, you rock," Engie called out to the Vila in the group as she played the guitar near the jukebox, her singing wild and exciting for the party. Tom had managed to drink so much that he reverted to being a tiny fox, while Driller tried to follow the poor stumbling fox around, until Tom finally gave up and just passed out at Akitsu's feet. Driller grinned and went to pick Tom up, but Akitsu simply froze him solid and picked up Tom for herself. It was only fair that his wives take care of him, not some dwarven male. Akitsu knew Tom would be incredibly unhappy if Driller was the one he woke up with anyways, and she was cool enough to help keep him from getting sick from all the alcohol he had consumed. Which was why she tucked Hum between her breasts and tightened her chains to hold him there better, his head poking out of them for some fresh air while he slept, drooling all over her breasts and wiggling in his sleep. "Ah," she blushed, knowing full well how this looked. "He's too cute." Musubi grinned, drinking her 14th barrel of blackout stout, her steps slightly wobbly as the dwarves cheered on her dancing. It was interesting, but she was a fist type, and did have 2 merged cores within her that could help purge such things, one of which was even a single-digit core and one that was absurdly powerful at that. But yet even so, Akitsu watched as the dwarves realised it was slowly starting to work, and all ganged up to pick her up and take her behind the abyss bar for something, only for several loud sonic booms to sound out, and Musubi to come back out covered in alcohol, and the abyss bar to suddenly say closed for vandalism and theft. And Musubi, she was incredibly drunk. She finally smirked, walked over to Akitsu and Tom, and kissed the man on the foxy lips while he was unconscious to gain her Norito after a few misses. Akitsu realised what was about to happen too late, as Musubi grinned. "All right, who wants to dance with me?" she roared, and with a mighty stomp shattered the space rig to pieces. Suffice to say, Mission Control was not happy with them when he collected them from the void. "All right, miners, what have we learned?" Mission Control asked them with a slight grimace. "Not to get Musubi drunk on the space rig," the dwarves said in unison. "Good, because the next time this happens, we're flooding the space rig with radion gas. Diplomatic incidents be damned," Mission Control told them, wiping his greasy forehead with a sigh. "I'll fucking do it again," Driller chuckled. "Then I'm sure you won't mind the bill for the purchase of Space Rig 19 for your use coming out of your paycheck," Mission Control grunted. "That will be all, miners. Now get back to work. At least this space rig has Jetty Boot 2, Electric Boogaloo, instead of just the first one," Musubi grinned. "I beat the first one 3 times in a row last time, by getting past level 255 and letting it loop back around to level 1 without even realising it." "That's impossible! You cheated!" Scout tried, but was ultimately cut off by a chuckle from Engie. "Nah, I watched her the whole time," Engie told them. "She was just that good at it." Whether or not she beat it legitimately, it was pretty clear that she broke the rig entirely. "So we'll never know for sure," Gunner told them with a sigh. "But at least we'll be able to see if she can beat Jetty Boot too." "Oi, that sounds like a good idea," Engie grinned. "Why don't we take a look?" And that was the start of something great. Strange, but great nonetheless. HSH 4 to 10. "All right, miners, listen up. We've got a job for you." Mission Control called out to Tom and the dwarves over the rig's intercom with a hint of a growl. "Oh yeah, rock and roll!" Engie shouted in response. Tom, on the other hand, he knew what was coming. Unfortunately, our little friend here, Tom, has managed to fuck us all over rather spectacularly with his use of magic. A glyphid pair managed to get back to their breeding hive, and the end result was a glyphid dreadnought with instant death magic. Doubly unfortunate was the fact that despite all our efforts to exterminate the resulting dreadnoughts, one of them managed to survive and mature against all odds. Mission Control audibly took a breath at this point, seeming to steady himself for what he was going to say next. "It has some kind of force shield as a special mutation that allows it to catch and dispose of any nukes we send at it long before they can detonate, and then it simply eats the reactive materials to increase its own radioactive death breath ability that can and will kill anyone within radius if it goes off," he told them quietly. "So you're going to need to find some way to crack that shield and pump it full of lead until it finally dies, before it reaches the core and starts to cause all the glyphids to become miniature variants of this, and makes it completely untenable to continue mining operations on Hox's 4. "I don't like the sound of that," Scout told them with a grunt, "but at least we might have a pretty bangin' solution." "If you mean the untested weapon that Tom has created, then I doubt it will be of any use." Mission Control waved it off. "There's nothing a man-portable quad-turbo laser battery can do that our own shard diffractor can't do better, and with less effort. But we do have a set of supped-up shields we will be handing out to anyone who decides to participate, as well as upgraded armour with void-walking capabilities and immunity to thermonuclear blasts at point-blank range, so you all should be fairly well protected from the critters down there." Tom sighed. He was fairly certain there was a catch to this. "None of you are expected to survive this," Mission Control mentioned, "just to hold them off long enough for the Dwarven military to get their shit in gear and wipe it out themselves. But if you do manage to kill it, Deep Rock Galactic has prepared a hefty paycheck for you upon your return." "Woo yeah, I love me some credits," Scout grinned, raising his pickaxe. "Rock and stone, everyone." "For Carl," the others agreed. With that, they got to work setting up for the biggest mission of their lives. Meanwhile, Tom, knowing full well he had to go, and that he couldn't risk his wives, was in a bit of a conundrum. especially as Musubi was adamant that she go with him, even if Akitsu knew full well she'd only be in the way and thus didn't ask. "I can help. I'm a physical fighter. Just give me a warhammer and a shield and I'll be able to do it," she told him with a growl. "I got one better for you," Enji told them, hauling over an upgraded version of his shotgun that had been modified to be a 4-gauge. "Okay," Musubi asked. "Then do you have something that I can use to increase the power of my—" "And these," Engineer grinned, showing off a pair of gauntlets that would attach over her armor and allow her to punch at range. "Force gloves will carry your momentum forwards and allow you to punch things, even if you're nowhere near them." At this point, Tom knew he had no choice but to accept that Musubi was going to be coming along for the mission, whether he liked it or not. Yet even so, he wasn't happy about it in the slightest. Still, he knew he was going to simply have to deal with it. He made his way over to the drop pod, carrying his weapon with him and strapping in. "We'll kill it this time, the proper way," Tom told them with a serious expression on his face. "I sure hope so," Mission Control sighed, "because if not, it's your lives on the line and I've grown rather fond of you." Tom nodded, and the rest of the team boarded the drop pod one by one. Soon they were off, and the sound of vocal cheers that Tom really didn't feel echoed all the way down. "I got a bad feeling about this op," Scout called out as they drilled deeper into the planet beneath them. "I think I'm going to be sick," Engineer grumbled. "Get a hold of yourselves," Driller called back. "We'll be just fine down here." "It's a simple mission. Just exterminate every bug you see," Tom agreed, powering up the fusion reactor in his gun. "And I intend to do just that." And then the drop pod landed and was tossed across the cave as they got out of it. "Whoa! What in the—" Scout said, zipping away from an attack aimed directly at them by the target they were meant to kill. "Danger close. Things are about to go boom," Driller told them all. "Not yet," Musubi grinned, winding up and punching the shield in front of them with all her force. "Hiya!" she called out, being launched back even as the massive bug's shield shattered, and they were able to get a good look at it. A massive black and white coloured beetle with hundreds of eyes that seemed to lock onto their every move, a massive mouth on its abdomen that spewed forth a mist that looked like thousands of ghastly glyphid souls and a few dwarven ones. This thing was nasty. Musubi knew better than to touch any of the ghosts, so she used her force gauntlets to crack some of the armour and shatter the eyes while the driller's C4 fell onto its body, right into its open mouth. "Now," she yelled, and the C4 exploded, breaking open most of the armour for them. Tom took that moment to unload with his gun, as did Gunner and Scout, while Driller used his cryo-cannon to take down the hive guards and sentinels with Enji. Well, to be fair, Scout was taking on anything that looked like a target of opportunity with everything he had, and was kiting several swarms at once most of the time to keep them off the others, especially while freezing even more of them with his cryo-grenades. When the thing screamed and began to spew forth more souls again, Gunner tossed in a cluster grenade and it exploded right within the mouth, doing incredible damage to the bug again and allowing Musubi to punch it one more time, shattering an opening to its still beating heart. Tom smirked, aiming right for it like he was trained, and raining fire upon it like it was his holy mission to crusade against the demonic bugs from the other world, and before long it screamed its death toll. Sure enough, it began to fade into nothing, and the rest of the bugs tried to flee, something they weren't eager to let happen. "Good work, miners. Now mop up the rest of them, and we'll send in the drop pod," Mission Control told them with a note of surprise in his voice. It was really a lot harder than she made it sound, with a lot of details she probably missed, but she was kind of fighting a bunch of bugs with her fists, so it wasn't exactly something she wanted to think about all too hard anyways, but at least it was kind of fun. Once the last bug was killed, they raised their pickaxes and smiled. "That's it, lads, rock and stone," she said, getting into the spirit. "Rock and roll and stone," Scout agreed as the drop pod landed nearby. "Let's get to the drop pod. We can salute each other once we're safe," Tom told them, running towards it with the dwarves not far behind. Musubi grinned, getting there before the others, and raising her fists. "For Carl!" she exclaimed. All the dwarves looked at her like she was the second coming of Dwarven Jesus. "Tom, buddy old pal, where do I find me a woman like that?" Scout asked him with a grin. "Back on my Forge world," Tom told him with a smirk. "Why, you interested in changing jobs? After what we did here today, I think DRG will set up a branch on your world if you ask them," Gunner chuckled. "And I like to think we'd be more than willing to be your first dwarves to join up." "I would hope so," Tom grinned, "because I like hanging out with all of you." "Oh, shucks," Driller blushed, and they all laughed. With that, they slowly arrived back on the space rig and settled in for a round of beers and a fun party. Home sweet home, 4 to 11. Bard, I hear that today's the day your father returns home, Clement, the dragonborn son of Fleur, called out to Bard with a grin. You must be excited. Bard shrugged. He hadn't really ever met his father, at least not that he could remember, not in person at least. On top of that, any communications they had were brief, expensive, and over-encrypted lines. It wasn't something he could do frequently, and nothing of importance could be said over the lines in case of a security breach, which made it worse, because the one time he was allowed over to meet his father, the dwarves got into drunken brawl and he was unfortunately left by the trash dump. This, among other things, ensured that he would never be allowed to visit the space rig ever again, especially because such a thing would likely result in his imminent death, and his father would have to remove them from the galaxy, or at least that was what his mum said. Who knows what he'd actually do, because it really did seem like he liked the dwarves more than his own family at this point. Seriously, did it hurt to come visit them at home from time to time? Like, he understood that his dad had to work in the mines every day, but really? Even on Christmas? The dwarves celebrated Christmas. He knew that much. So why didn't he just take the holidays off and come see his mum? What's wrong? You don't like your father or something? Clement asked, his dragon-like eyes wide and innocent. It's not that, Bard sighed. I just don't really know what my dad even likes. Or like, really what he'd be cool with. So I don't really have anything I can talk to him about. And wasn't that a problem? While he was pretty sure his dad was not interested in his family, he kinda wanted to make him interested, and the man only really seemed to care about building things and killing his enemies, which also happened to be bugs apparently. But when he beat up an arachne at school, he was told off by his mum, and his mum was way more cool. Maybe his dad was just a loser? Would make a lot more sense if he wasn't around because he didn't want his bad habits rubbing off on him too early or some other excuse. Bard wanted to believe his dad had a real reason, you know. It just sucked that all the things he thought of were things that got him told off by his mum for being untrue, if he spoke about them in front of others. He had learned to keep his thoughts to himself as a result of that. Because he really didn't want to make his mum sad. She tended to destroy training ranges when she was sad, and that cost him a lot of time playing with friends to clean up after her so that they didn't have to pay for it. Like, Nanoms were great and all, but he really didn't want to have to use his affinity for time magic to restore objects more than once per week. Especially not entire training rooms. It made him feel icky afterwards. He couldn't even heal people with it, so it was pretty pointless to train it regardless. Seriously, what good was reversing your armor's strength to max if you couldn't even restore your own? You know, if you talked more with him, maybe you'll find that he's not so bad, Clement asked with a hint of curiosity in his voice. Might be fun, you know. Yeah, maybe, Bard sighed. All right, I'll go see what's up at home. Maybe Mum has an update on when he'll be here. Catch you later, my friend, Clement chuckled, waving him off as he left his friend's house and made his way back through the busy streets of Sector 9 to get back to his home. People said Sector 9's upper plate was where all the rich people lived, that only politicians and wealthy business people could live there. But oh boy, did it feel like the opposite most of the time. People had started drawing on every surface, covering up street signs with their own drawings even, just to make the people there uncomfortable or something. Trash built up in the streets, as though no one had ever heard of an incinerator before. Hell, yokai roamed the streets at night looking for an easy meal. It was the scariest sector by far, but no one seemed to believe him for some reason. Everyone told him the lower plates were scarier, but he knew better. Down there Uncle Lex lived, and he was the big boss of a lot of people. They worked on big projects, drank funny juice, and genuinely had a good time. People on the lower plates were happy. They had each other's backs, and he could see the respect they had for everyone, regardless of if they had enough money to tell them to fuck off. Sure, he was in a family that was considered the top dogs of the whole world, but that just made him a target, which was why he trained hard and got real good at fighting. How many times had he found himself the target of bullies that wanted to steal his face? How many times had a shapeshifter in school told him that if they had so much as a chance, they'd replace him? So many times he narrowly escaped death by praying to the goddess Inari and holding a bow menacingly, that he wasn't sure if he wanted to live on the upper plates anymore. Still, his mum was here, and she was a badass. She kept him safe, even when he was asleep and the scarier monsters came out from under his bed. But his dad? He paused in his thoughts to open the door to his home, the keypad recognizing him instantly as he touched it. It was an old one, but it was one Lex built, and his mum didn't feel like upgrading to one with newer security from Arterius Industries when this one worked fine. Something perked at his ears as he made his way deeper inside. A smooth, rich voice that sounded kinda like his dad's would, if it was less crackly and staticky. But he knew his dad usually sounded way more tired than whoever this was. "Ah, sounds like Bard's back home," the man said, the door to the kitchen opening with a swish. "How's it going, kid?" Bard stood there for several minutes, just taking in the look of his father, standing there at home like nothing was weird about this, blinking. "Ha, ha. You don't remember me?" the man asked awkwardly. "I'm Tom, and I am your father." "Was that supposed to be a reference to something?" Bard asked, tilting his head. The silence in the room was deafening. "So, I'll add movie night to the list of family activities we really need to do sometime." His apparent father coughed into his hand, before ushering him in with the same hand. Bard shivered. Gross. The man had just coughed into that hand, he should at least wash it before touching him, even if it was just his shoulder. Soon they were all seated at the dinner table, and they had a hologram displaying some sort of, he didn't actually know. "So tell me, Sport," Tom began, seeming a little overly excited. "Have you dealt much with money before?" Bard stared at his father blankly. "Ah ha ha ha, right," Tom chuckled. "Well, basically, this diagram means due to a recent influx of Dwarven workers, Deep Rock Galactic has come set up shop on our world, making use of our factories to make their equipment, which means we're making a lot more money than before. Foreign money, even." "Oh," Bard looked at him like he was stupid. "I hate to break it to you, but "Ah," Tom nodded, swapping the topics entirely. "So how about school? Anything interesting going on there? Learn anything cool?" "It's a school, Dad," Bard pointed out plainly. "And?" His dad tilted his head, those silly ears of his flopping as he did so. "Since when was school fun?" he asked with a look of serious confusion. "Huh," Tom shrugged. But still, even though Bard would like nothing more than for this questioning to end, his father continued. "Do you have any hobbies or interests?" his dad asked with a grin. "Archery?" he half asked. His dad looked at him and nodded. "All right. Do you prefer long bows, short bows, compound bows, crossbows, light bows, hard light bows, guns, and what is your favourite part about them?" Bard was really unsure how to answer that, especially since it was because of Aiko Inari that he picked them up in the first place, as a way to scare off yokai, which he was well aware was one of those things people generally considered racist. "It's okay. You don't have to answer," his father claimed. But he could tell the man was disappointed, which, considering the pouty face he made, hit like a punch to the gut. "I understand," the man said, but he truly didn't look like he did. After a while, an android came out with a meal, and they silently began to eat. Of course, it was silent, awkward, and he had no real idea what to say. But he looked over at his Aunt Masubi playing Flappy Bird on a screen and asked her something to restart the conversation anyways. "So, Aunt Masubi, right?" he asked, as he remembered something being talked about a few days ago with her. "Yeah? What's up, Bard?" she asked cheerfully, looking up from her game and still somehow passing levels at hyper difficulty with no problem. What was life like, with the dwarves and all?" he asked her carefully. "Oh, I can show you," she grinned, tossing another tablet at him to land perfectly in his hands. "Good catch. Press play on that video." What he saw next made him realise just how badass his family was when push came to shove, and why his dad had asked if he liked guns. But his aunt was very, very hard to pull his eyes away from after that. "Woo, this is so cool," he told her with a bright smile. "Your dad had to deal with that stuff every day just to make it so that he could come home to you with a mastery in dwarven forging and mining, so that he could keep our family safe and happy," Masubi chirped. The other auntie he somewhat didn't recall nodded, freezing some of her juice and passing it to him carefully on a stick from beside him. "Ah," she said, and he obliged by opening his mouth and accepting the treat. He saw her smile happily, and he felt butterflies in his chest. He liked his aunts, and he had no idea how to handle this. Now Akitsu, let him eat his dinner first," Mum said with a grin, poking her tongue out at the ice woman. Akitsu pouted. Of course she did. It was too cute. "Okay," Akitsu nodded and sat properly in her chair, the chains jangling like jello and drawing attention to places that made him blush and turn away. This was going to be awkward, all the way through, wasn't it? HSH4-12. When dealing with his dad became too much, Bard went over to his friend Clement's house, and they hung out a little. But of course he was always forced to go home at the end of the day, and he never really quite wanted to leave. Which was why one day, when his best friend Clement asked him a simple question, he wasn't about to say no. "Why don't we just leave together and explore the galaxy?" he asked Bard, the look on his face wild and filled with the thought of adventure. "We could steal a ship and fly away, never to deal with those silly Asari or your dad ever again." Bard grinned. That's a great idea," he told the Dragonborn before he could chicken out. "Why don't we just go right now?" "What, with just the clothes on our back?" Clement asked with a chuckle. Bard maintained a serious expression. It would be exactly what they needed to do to escape his dad. "Yeah. I heard from a book that sometimes teenagers run away to go find themselves. We should go do that too, right?" Bard tried, looking at his friend with hope. "Of course, my little friend," Clement grinned. "It will be fun." He was glad Clement agreed, because he was fairly sure if they tried to pack they would get caught, which would suck majorly. "Come on, Clement, let's just go," he grinned, grabbing his, admittedly rather pretty, friend by the hand and taking him over to the nearest dock. "It will be easier if we just go. You'll see." Approaching the first ship docked in the bay that they could see, they smirked and began to walk up to it, only for a security guard to speak up from behind them. "You there. This isn't your sector. Get lost," the guard told them, shooing them away immediately. It was horrifying that they got caught so soon, and that the guard radioed it in immediately, but they ran off right away. Of course, they tried this with a few more ships in various sectors, but that same guard seemed to be everywhere. It was like they were being followed, at least until they managed to get to his mother's ship, where there were two of the same guard in their bright white armour and bulky helmets, talking to each other with a laugh between them. "Ha ha ha, I get it, Fives, but this is actually their mother's ship, so if they want to explore here, then just send them over to me. I'll show them around and let them have a little fun before sending them home, all right?" "You're too relaxed, Nines," the other identical voice growled. "What if they get hurt? You know how it is. The boss will have our heads." "You worry too much, Fives. What can a bunch of kids really get up to on a ship that's totally locked down? They don't even know that they have to press the key fob to the docking clamp before they get in, or the ship won't start," Nines said, rubbing the back of their helmet. "The same key fob you keep in the shitter just down the hall? Dumbass, that's too easy to bypass," Fives groaned. "At least tell me you have the keys to the ship locked up." "I don't even have to. It's a biometric lock," Nines grinned. "They can't get in without having been already keyed to it." Bard snorted. He knew full well that the man was a dumbass, because he was already added to the biometric locks when he was a baby, so that the defences wouldn't try to shoot him if he was on board the ship alone. "Go get the keys for the clamp, Clement. I'll meet you inside the ship," he told his friend with a chuckle. "All righty, my friend. I shall be swift," he claimed, rushing down the indicated hallway to the washroom nearby. Only a few moments passed, and Bard managed to get on the ship without being noticed. Only a few minutes later, the clamps were disengaged, and the ship began to power on. Bard ushered his friend inside and waved him forwards. "Come on, the bridge is this way," he said with a smile. "Hurry up, let's go." The doors to the ship closed and it began to hover as they got to the bridge, the onboard AI booting up to greet them. "Hello, young Master Bard," she giggled, greeting them. "And who is this young dragon with you?" "That's Clement, Siri. You can meet him when we're out of here," Bard groaned. "Of course, young master," she purred, adjusting the pilot's seats for them automatically and scooping them up in them. "Just tell me where you wish to go, and I will guide you." "To somewhere fun," Clement chuckled. The door to the outside began to close, and the guards outside finally noticed something was wrong. "Hey, I thought you said—" "Internal pressurization in progress. Please advance slowly, until your internal equilibrium has normalized. The route to somewhere fun has been noted, and several destinations have been found. Waiting on your input, young Master Bard." "Let's go to Earth via the Elven Tree," Bard grinned, looking at Clement with a smile. "It will be so cool." "Your route has been selected. Please follow the designated flight path," the AI told them with a smile on its digital face. With that, they took off in a hurry, just missing the panicked guards and almost toppling several boxes of strange cargo on the way out. "Ah!" Tom was furious. Not only had his children taken off on his wife's pleasure yacht, which was something they had been planning to decommission before he left due to potentially being a hazard to his family, but he had managed to do so in a way that made it impossible to go after them himself. Apparently, raising Bard was so time-consuming that his wife had completely forgot about it after a while, and left it essentially sitting there to rot. Which was made even worse, because he knew full well it had an Alienware AI core, which was going to cause him so many issues when he wanted to track the kids down. And to add insult to injury, he had found out that there was corruption on his homeworld. Some genius thought that when the elves came to acquire yokai children for their nature preserves, that it would legitimately be okay to kidnap and steal children from families on the lower plates and sell them off to the elves, because apparently none of the council Harry had appointed saw qualms with literal slavery and rampant racism. God, he could only hope that that shit hadn't rubbed off on his son. If it had, then he was going to have issues with the types of people that had been apparently elected in his absence, and potentially arrange a few disappearances. After all, corruption like this would never happen if he had all the power. If he was emperor, he liked the sound of that. But how to get the council to vote him in as the supreme power once more? He would think more on this once his son was back and being properly disciplined for his actions. For now, he would sit on his cushion and work the knot out of his tail fur with his teeth, while he tried to figure out the best way to handle the current situation, especially since it seemed Harry wasn't capable of keeping his fellow council members in line. "Now entering the elvish sector," Ciri told them joyfully, guiding them close to the elven tree so that they could take a closer look. "Oh my! Bud, it's not even a tree," Clement giggled, pointing to the massive manufacturing planet they could see below with several fleshy parts reaching towards the sky. "It's a meat machine. It looks so tasty." "I don't know about that." Bard groaned, looking like he was going to be sick. "It looks wrong to me." "Ha ha ha. Look, it even has faces in it," he told Bard, having Ciri zoom in on the tortured face of a goblin that was screaming in rage and pain. "I don't know what they did to make this, but that's freaking cool." "Ciri, take us back home," Bard told the AI. "I'm sorry, Bard, but I can only accept a new route once you've completed the current one," the AI apologized. "Ciri, the path you've put us on is telling me to land on that planet and take another ship the rest of the way." Bard tried, but Ciri just chuckled. "I'm running low on fuel, Bard. You'll need to send me for repairs soon too. I won't be able to finish the trip." "Then take us home, you dumb AI," he yelled. "I'm sorry, Bard, I can only accept a new route once you've completed the current one," the AI told him again. Clement could see the issue. "Then give us manual control and we'll make our own route," he told the AI sternly. "The chances of you making it back unaided are under 7 decimal places of a percent. This is within acceptable margins. Feel free to take the wheel," Ciri told them, and completely removed their autopilot permissions, which meant Bard had full control of the ship, with no AI assist, and the ship was accelerating beyond what it was supposed to be capable of. Of course, the local elven police patrol immediately noticed them, and with a sharp glare forced a connection with their ship through their AI. "Hilt, who goes there?" the elf asked with a look of greed. "Is these Enethir sheep of Metareals?" No." Bard tried, but before he could speak further, Clement grinned and spoke. "These is the important laird Jivi's Mirko, and we're just deprecating the seats before we went to pick up more cargo for ourselves," he told the officer with a grin. Then don't let me keep you," the elf cheered. "Have fun!" When the line went dead, they burst out in laughter and accidentally slapped the bomb button while they turned around and flew away, a small nanite bomb flying out and making contact with the massive flesh tree and spreading across it as they flew off and away from their elven space. This would come to be the sole reason that Akane didn't simply destroy the elves outright, but they had no idea at the time that they just saved a significantly evil race from genocide. Akane took note of a rather fun development that one of her funny pranks on Tom had caused. She had made that AI for his ship personally, and made it so that if he didn't take it out on long walks at least once a month, it would become sassy and unhelpful after a while of flying it, like a dumb dog. It was even modelled after a really stupid blonde girl she had the displeasure of knowing when she was part of the original. Seriously, it was just supposed to be a joke, but it discovered something horrific. The elves were using yokai to create a massive biological ship that they were going to present to her as a new flagship, something that would have sent her into a genocidal rage had they actually succeeded, or had she found out on her own. What was it that Aiko had said? Omnipotent, but not omnipresent or omniscient. She really felt the understatement of those words at this point. Still, she felt that it was necessary to not only take the children back, but thoroughly punish the damn elf that had ordered this. And she knew who had done it, as he was the leader of all the elves and was quite capable of ordering such monstrosities on a whim. Fucking Matthias. The bastard had been out to breed her since the day he had met her, and she stepped on his face. It wasn't her fault that he was such a delusional simp, that he thought that becoming her minion meant she approved of him. She really didn't, but it was a choice between them, or the dwarves, and the elves controlled by him had a unique little affinity for mass production and celestial-scale engineering that was quite interesting to her at the time. What a mistake that was, especially since the elves couldn't gather resources manually for shit, and ruined them more often than not when using their drones. Of course, this was made worse because they were all arrogant little shits that didn't know their place, and had not truly innovated in millennia. As she thought of this, she sent some ships to corner and capture the kids, watching as they killed more and more of the sacrificial elven drones, right up until she took direct control of them, and had them connect to her AI so she could force the ship to dock with hers. Damn kids didn't know what they were doing, but she could swear that the kid had reverted the ship backwards in time and space to dodge her graviton tethers twice. She was definitely going to have to poke Tom into looking into it for her. Maybe the boy might be somewhat interesting to use as a clone army. She made her way aboard the ship as soon as it docked, and took control, the two kids nearly pissing themselves when she took a sample of each of their blood while she held them up with her tails. The boy smelled strongly of pipe fox when he tried to use his power again, but he still didn't manage to do anything to her. Of course, she smiled. I'll be taking you home now, she told them bluntly, making her ship follow behind in stealth mode. With that, she took them back to their world, parked the ship back where it was supposed to be, and marched them back through the hallways into Tom's temporary home. Why was it temporary? Because Tom belonged to her, so naturally his home was with her. She coughed, placing the kids down and pushing them towards the dumb little cutie she was going to claim. You should really spank your kids more often, she told him when he looked over to her, because you know shit's fucked when I have to be the one to save them and bring them back. Tom's eyes were wide as he grabbed his son and fled the room, letting Fleur and Rossweiser square up to her. This was fun. Welp, I'll be watching, Akane cackled with a grin, activating the teleporter in her mug of coffee with a grin, and disappearing into her ship the moment they went to attack. Her cackling would likely be heard in their minds for a long, long time. Home sweet home 4-13. Tom was in a rather horrid mood. He had tried his best to sit down with Rossweiss and Bard after they had all calmed down from what had happened, but the only thing Bard was remorseful for was having seen the horrors of the outside universe, which had apparently made him sick to his stomach. When the brat was told exactly how that was made according to their investigations, Bard's only comment on the matter was that he didn't know yokai could be bought and sold. The kid was particularly hopeful that he could go out again, and wished to properly explore the universe fully with someone else's ship. One that wasn't a faulty piece of junk made by yokai hands, in his own words. Bard's attitude towards what he considered to be the monsters in the night, that he believed that it was good that it was only yokai that were being sold as materials for an eldritch monstrosity, was something that made it very tempting to simply beat the ever-loving shit out of his son, but he knew all too well what that would get him. Instead, he went to the teachers in his school, hoping to find some hope of redemption for the kid. The gym teacher, as he made his way over to the man, smiled and greeted him. "Oh, Mr. Thomas?" The Oni grabbed Tom and held him under his arm with a grin. "Your son is a rising star, you know that. Put anything throwable or that can shoot in his hands and he's dead accurate. He even managed to scar me twice." Tom sighed. "I think I've heard enough from you to get a good idea where I need to start." "Ha ha, no problem, little buddy. Come by for the teacher-parent gathering tonight. It's down on the Sector 7 lower plate bar. 7th heaven," he grinned, letting Tom go and patting him on the back. "It'll be great." "All right," Tom nodded. It would be a good idea as it would let him get to know the teachers in a more relaxed setting, and he had been to the Sector 7 bar before when it had yet to be named, before he went to study with the dwarves. He actually quite liked the place. Soon he made his way over to the next classroom and opened the door after a polite knock. It was a vampire teacher with a completely stoic appearance he met with, but the moment the vampire looked at him, he began to sob. Oh, Tom," the man cried openly, "I have no idea how to tell you how horrible it's been trying to teach your son." "I think I can see it already," Tom explained. The vampire sniffled. "In all my years as a teacher, I've never met someone so utterly dumb and racist in my life. It's a miracle I managed to teach him how to add and subtract." "Wait, so he can't even multiply or divide?" Tom asked in horror. "Nah!" the vampire wailed. "Am I called the Count of Counting for nothing? I can't even teach the poor child to multiply and divide. Eee!" he wailed, his banshee wife coming in behind Tom to try to quiet him down, with an apologetic expression. After a moment to make his way out of the classroom and recover his hearing, he moved on to the next classroom. The language arts teacher, Professor Woolsworth. He knew her as he had personally helped her get her position as a teacher back on Shang-Chi, due to finding how utterly calming her presence was a massive boon to that line of work. As a sheep yokai, she looked like a small and cute fluffy young sheep woman, and her temperament meant she was most suited to positions where she would be needed to help people either fall asleep or be calm and focused for whatever they needed to do. It was virtually impossible to aggravate her as well, as he had found out over the years of many people trying and quickly falling to her cuteness and charm. Yet for some reason, when he saw her this time, she looked visibly stressed. "Professor Woolsworth?" Tom asked with a tilt of his head. "I've come to discuss what's wrong with my son since I've been away for so long. Mind filling me in on his behaviours in the classroom?" "Oh, Tom, my friend," she deflated into her chair and cracked a beer on the spot, passing him one from a mini fridge. "I don't even know where to start." "Oh dear God, he drove you to drinking?" he asked, looking at the 90-proof beer in his hand. He didn't know they made 90-proof beer. "Well, yes," she sighed. "It has gotten to the point where I need a couple of these after every shift where he actually shows up, just to distress," she politely sipped from her can. "Because if I don't, I start to worry if he's going to kill one of the students for making an off comment, like wishing they had as much money as he did, so they could play their favourite games with him online. Or even if he'd try to force the students to clean off the sanctioned art murals that Ross Wease and Harry had commissioned to liven up our district." "Fuck," Tom groaned. "What can I even do at this point?" "Well, for starters, you could possibly discipline him by sending him to a more strict school," she told him bluntly, even if she remained polite in tone. "And then you could maybe educate him on magic and yokai, because it looks like your headwife has no idea how to raise children." "Yeah, no kidding," he groaned, placing the beer back in her hand as she finished hers. "Drink. You need this more than me." "Thanks." She coughed into her arm. "I will be sure to stop as soon as I can have enough of a break from him, but literally no one wants to deal with his hardline racism and his far-right political ideals at this point now that they've truly come to light and he's become more vocal about them." She shuddered. "His boyfriend, Clément, seems to lean into that as well, allowing him to do whatever he wants and even agrees with it." Tom paused. Far-right and gay? That made absolutely no sense. But he knew better than to call that one out, as he would likely be called the equivalent of a Nazi if he did. "Right," Tom groaned piteously. "I'll be sure to withdraw him from this school at least. I have word that Lex will be visiting soon, so maybe I'll have him apprentice under the Krogan for a while." "It would probably do him some good," Professor Woolsworth sighed. "But for now, please find some time to blow my back out because I'm in need of some good stress relief." "I'll have to ask my wives," Tom told her in a non-committal tone. "But maybe." "I'll text Ross Weiss myself so she isn't surprised by it," Professor Woolsworth chuckled. "Lord knows how many times we've shared a bed while you were away, so I highly doubt she'll take issue with it." "Right," Tom smiled. This was certainly something he would talk with his wife about later. For now, however. "I need to make some calls, so I'll be off," Tom told her. "Make sure to take a cab if you plan to leave the school rather than trying to drive." "Always do, Tom," she nodded. He sighed. "Have a pleasant night." With that, he left, closing the door behind him with a small frown. He was going to have a long talk with his son. What he had found out was not acceptable in any way, shape or form. In any case, he had a meeting with Lex to get home for. Hopefully his buddy would have something he could use to help this fuck-up of a situation become at least a little better. Lex was surprised. He didn't think the little tyke had it in him to be as racist as he was apparently being towards basically his own kind. But hearing Tom and Ross Weiser speak about it, it was apparently a rather important issue. Normally Krogan were somewhat racist themselves as part of their culture. It was a bit of friendly ribbing here and there that they all loved and made good friends over, but they all knew not to take it too far. Apparently Bard just hadn't learned that lesson yet. Which was why, when he finally got around to mulling it over, he waited a moment for them to turn to him and gave them a nod. "How about you just send the little pyjack to military school?" he asked with a small grin. "It's what my people did to our unruly runts when they didn't want to grow up smart. Even my own son went through all that." "You know what?" Tom nodded. "You're right. We'll send him to the Atlas Academy of Arms." "The Pinky Battery School?" Masubi asked from the sidelines. "Are you sure that's okay? Won't he break the kids?" "Not if he's shoved in the barracks with all the yokai," Lex disagreed. "They'll set him straight, whether he wants to be or not." "Sounds like a plan," Tom chuckled. "So how are we going to tell him? I say we drop him off there without warning and tell him not to come back until he's fixed his attitude, Rossweiser grumbled. After all, it is a boarding school, and it's only a single sector over regardless. Then that's exactly what we'll do, Tom told her, placing his hand on her knee. Lex grunted. Well, far be it from me to tell you what to do in your family, but I can comment that might cause some issues down the line, he rumbled. Call me if you need anything, though. I'll be dealing with the latest fuck-up that the council made regarding power distribution among the sectors while I set up the secondary reactors for the next jump. Sounds like a plan, Tom grinned. Then let's get a move on, yeah? Rossweiser sighed. Lex fully understood the sentiment. Bard was shocked. His parents dropped him off inside a brand new school with none of his friends around him, and with only yokai in his supposed new home as a sort of punishment. And for what? Being honest? Speaking the truth? Saying things that everyone already knew and agreed on? It was bullshit. He was being tormented for having the balls to speak up. It was abuse, and it was all his shitty yokai of a father's fault. His dad probably wasn't even his. It was probably just some other council member that made him sit and watch while he made him. Wait. How were babies made again? It was mentioned in one of his classes, but he didn't quite remember. Or wait, maybe the reason his dad had left was because he thought Bard was a mistake, that he needed to learn better forging so he could make a better child. That must have been it. His dad had fucked up, so it was his own fault, which meant that when he was doing things that were too good for what his dad had expected of him, and he performed too well in unexpected areas, he was shipped off to a new buyer that actually wanted what he had on offer. Traded away like those filthy yokai were traded. Oh dear goddess Aiko, please smite the yokai so I don't have to sleep in a dirty, smelly barracks, he grumbled over a cup of coffee. In response, a massive book slammed into his face and knocked him off his bench, the boys in the back row laughing as he picked himself up. To make matters worse, in the coffee he had spilt, the letters, "Get fucked, racist prick," had spelled themselves out to him, showing that his goddess had truly abandoned him. Try not to get your ass handed to you in spars, dumbass, a Tengu yokai grinned. Or at least learn to shut your mouth around others, so you don't get yourself killed. Needless to say, when an entire cafeteria of beings much stronger than you all looked like they wanted to rip you to shreds, you generally learned not to stir the pot, regardless of your personal beliefs. Home, sweet home 4-14. Remember the room of requirement. Have a look at what Harry's doing. It was another long day. Harry had dealt with yet another uprising of dark wizards back on his original world, hopped home for a spot of tea, and then was off with Karasuba to fight off an army invading Shanxi before lunch. After he had a quick sandwich, it was off to the Citadel, where he was told rather rudely that he needed to bring back Aiden Betterballs and Tivos from his world, as the Citadel was nearly destroyed by some sort of techno-organic ship named Sovereign while he was gone, and Commander Shepard was apparently making them all look bad. Harry had to politely remind them that if they did not wish to return on their own, that he in no way could make them, no matter how much he tried. That he was a mercenary, not a courier, and thus had no desire nor ability to do the things they demanded on a whim. That was something that had pissed them off rather fiercely, but he was unfortunately out of earshot before they could truly do much more than throw insults his way. Obviously, it would be in their best interest to step down and let some fresher minds take their place for the time being. Otherwise, who knew what might happen to them the next time they stepped outside for a break, and why they might even choke on their ambitious desires to control him. Truly what a wondrous thing the Force was. And of course, speaking of the Force, he had managed to tap into the universal magical unifier that allowed for some truly impressive feats. The Krogan Empire had taught him all about it. Of course, he made no promises about any sort of alliances or help he could possibly give to them, as he was fairly sure he couldn't open a door to the room of requirement into space. Hell, he didn't think he could open one large enough to fur a ship through regardless, let alone enough to fuck around and help this Commander Jane Shepard fix her galaxy. No, he couldn't really do much of anything besides focus on the worlds here. The doors to the room were open, and make sure they both remained heavily guarded, and ensure that no one who wasn't allowed to go through them did. Unfortunately, this left him with little to no time for his real job, which was as head of the council for Tom's planet. He still needed a name for the world, but all of them had left that to his Uncle Tom to do, and the bastard still hadn't bothered to update the name of his own damn planet. Harry may be immortal, ageless really, but it would be incredibly embarrassing to tell his daughter, Rosie, that the planet they lived on had no name because his uncle completely forgot to update the registry with a name. Still, it wasn't as bad as what he had heard the council was getting away with while he was out protecting their world. The horrible, terrible things they'd been up to, which was only made worse by the fact that he'd been sending more and more yokai to go move into Shang-Chi and Tom's world in spades to ensure that the wizards couldn't wipe them all out. Especially with Grindelwald appearing once more aided by some strange magical technology and an army to boot. But what was really just shite was that he was supposed to be in charge of them and stop them from doing the things they had done. He was supposed to curate and moderate them, and they had been acting with what they claimed was his full approval, despite not mentioning a word of this to him at all. They even forged his digital signature several times to sign off on deliveries, claiming he was an enigmatic bastard who would never meet with them personally. All the while, stealing all the money of the people with outrageous taxes meant to gouge people until they simply could not pay for projects that they never had the authority to approve of, and that simply weakened the defences of the planet further and further. At least until Lex and Saren had to step in and fix it all themselves on the lower and middle plates. Tom was understandably upset, but also completely understood why Harry prioritised keeping external threats away from them, regardless of the internal ones, as it was much easier to recover from corruption than it was a scorched world. Yet even so, the way Tom got in front of the entire world, made a speech about how things should not have gotten to the state it was in, and offered to be the one true leader of the entire world, just like he used to be on Shang-Chi, and pointed to how marvellous Shang-Chi had been during his tenure as president and CEO of the world. The way they all voted him back as the leader immediately, his uncle sure had the charisma of 1,000 brave leaders, all packed into one somewhat adorable body. But Harry knew Tom had finally figured out how to chance back, and was only using his pipefox ears and tail to gather support from all the yokai, which made up the vast majority of his world's population. Something that the councillors didn't truly take into account when they were making their own speeches to counter his. Human supremacy would never work on their world, because humans were a minority on their world, especially because wizards were classified as demonic humans by them in their own categories, as a way to make the wizarding chief of their world happy that they weren't lumped in with the councillors and their bullocks. Regardless of how things went, Tom was fairly certain that he was going to have to deal with yet another mess soon enough, so he grabbed Karasuba by the arse, gave Hermione a kiss, and got right back to work. Home Sweet Home 4-15. If one was to say any one thing about Ginny Weasley, it would be that she was a tenacious bitch. She was well aware of this, especially as she had done her absolute best to have Harry become her husband as he was meant to take her gently by the hair and choke her with his big, fat, heroic... To put it lightly, she was beyond frustrated. She was practically begging him to come to her, to come with her, and to come all over her again and again, but he never once responded to her owls. So instead, she put away the big book of Marxism for a moment, stopped using cheesy lines from it like, "We will grow our children big and strong, and feed them plenty of potatoes," and began cooking up a curse based on a hex she'd made as a child. The Bat Bogey Hex. The original just made a bit of a mess with booger bats, but this one, oh dear, this one managed to create true life from snot, causing people to sneeze bats. The ultimate form of her spell, which was highly contagious, and would cause massive amounts of trouble on a place like she'd heard he was living in. A dwarven cave, deep down in the Underdark, filled with goblins and trolls. Ha! It would be filled with bats in no time. And then he'd come begging to her to make it go away, and she'd say, "Not until I am pregnant with your child." Truly, it was a genius plan. It was the best plan. It would definitely work, and she knew it. She only had to test it by sending it in a letter to his kidnapper Voldemort. Truly, that would be for the best, wouldn't it? Jerry sighed, taking a sip of the special brew his son had made for them. It was unfortunate that the elixir Tom had made was so highly addictive, because even though he had become immortal, or more accurately unaging, he was still unable to shake the habit of drinking it daily. It simply was too good. It gave him the feeling of a rush of magical energy flowing through his very bones, the cold and refreshing beverage enough to soothe his nerves and make him feel as though he was powerful, despite not actually being as strong as he had hoped to be. Regardless, it was not something he should be doing long term. Who knew what kind of effects it could have on his body, especially with how many rituals had been done to it over the years? Why, his blood was made of cursed ice, his soul and flesh were merged with the phoenix flame. Even his bones had magical runes on them now due to how the Asgardian nanoms allowed him and Tom to mess around with them without opening themselves up. He was a walking magical sponge that could take any magical effect thrown at him and amplify it within himself before throwing it back with much more power. It was absurd how much thought Tom had put into ensuring his safety in a magical world, and he did his best to live up to his son's expectations by training every day and becoming the head of security for his as of yet unnamed world. Of course, he was unsure if Tom was willing to truly spend much time focusing on the after effects of imbibing too much of the elixir, so he simply had his wife make them more of it, and treated it as though it was simply soda. His wife said nothing, and he enjoyed it, so he saw no problems with continuing to drink it for a long time, but he knew now that it might have been having at least some effect on his body. Time passed much more slowly for him than it did others, seconds ticking away at the pace of 10, speech slowed until he had to pay much more attention to it, lest he slip up and speak far too fast for his friends. But it gave him much more time to simply think about things, and he was quite worried that if he continued to take the elixir, his seconds would continue to slow until a minute became an eternity. Surely his mind would shut down if that happened. A tap sounded at his door, the call of a bird of prey resounding in his ears as he made his way over to it. Tom spoke from where he was. "Can you get the door, Dad? My hands are full with the new holoprojector prototype." Jerry chuckled. He had set Tom on a task to make a holoprojector that could reproduce smells with magic, for the sake of a fun movie night with their grandson, Bard. Bard had had it rough in the military academy, and Jerry wanted to remind him that they all were still a family, even if they were punishing him for being a goddamn Nazi. Something to keep him from slipping through the cracks of their system and never being found again. "Right," Jerry chuckled, his own laughter sounding slow to his mind. "I'll go get it." When he opened the door, it was an owl holding a letter. He took the letter, and the owl held out its foot for him to put money in its pouch. "You can get your money from the one that sent you," Jerry told it sternly. "We don't even know who this Ginny Weasley is, so it's clearly not someone we care to receive physical mail from." He tried to hand it back, but the owl tore it open and his hand touched the letter. And then he felt a little odd, like he had to sneeze really, really badly. But what came out when he did was a literal swarm of bats. "Achoo! Achoo! Ah! Oh!" He sneezed violently, more and more bats coming out and flooding the area, even as he heard Tom, Rossweiser and the rest of the family starting to do the same. The owl seemed to smirk and left them dealing with all the bats by themselves. Jerry resolved to simply shoot any owls he saw after that, regardless of what they were bringing him. The bat bogey outbreak has become a wildly known phenomenon that has swept through sectors 9 to 13, affecting only humans and demonic humans, but causing so many bats to spawn everywhere that we somehow managed to curb the pyjack problems that were starting to crop up, NG explained as he grinned. And now we're live, with a cooking show to tell you how to cook the damn things and eat them, so that we can turn this problem around into a net positive. Gunnar smirked, patting the grill. "That's right, folks. Welcome to the first ever Cooking with DRG. Today, we try all sorts of different ways to cook these little bastards, and invite you to join in." Clement's eye lit up, and his mouth watered at the sight of a deep-fried bat. "I would like to try this. It sounds delicious." With that in mind, he endeavoured to finish his punishment duty as best as he could, so that he could eat deep-fried bats. Lex grinned, picking up a bat from his barbecue. "All right, which one of you boys are brave enough to try my barbecued skinned bat? I stuffed it with garlic and pepper X, so it should have quite the kick." One of the Oni spoke up from the background. "Hell yeah, let me try." Lex smirked, flipping it his way with a spatula and having it land perfectly on the Oni's plate. And when the Oni took a bite, he already knew it was a hit. "Woo, yeah, this shit is lit," the young Oni grinned. "We gotta catch more of these things, it's so good." "Don't worry," Lex chuckled, tossing a few more on the barbecue. "There's plenty where that came from." The yokai were everywhere. They bounced from wall to wall, collecting and stuffing their faces with living bats, swallowing the beasts alive to struggle within their stomachs. Bard shivered. How barbaric and evil must these beasts be? Yet, he couldn't help but find it amusing to watch the Nekomata pouncing and playing with their food. It really was just like watching cats play. And if he thought about it more like that, it was still incredibly racist. But it was accurately racist, and not nearly as offensive. Of course, he was fairly certain it would still get him scratched, but at the very least he'd be mostly fine, especially if he had some treats lined up for the ones that didn't scratch or bite. Some of those Nekomata even looked rather nice, sticking their butts in the air like that. Maybe he should watch this stuff more often. Of course, this wasn't the only thing that Ginny had sent through the Room of Requirement. She also sent a box of Cornish pixies through via Fred and George's owl, and had it sent to some poor bastard named Thor, who was given instructions to feed them and let them go wild nearby Tom. A task that the man saw no issue with, as long as she could guarantee it would cause no lasting harm. She grinned at that, and explained that any halfway competent wizard could deal with them in seconds, that they were simply annoying and silly to deal with, and like to hide in horrible places. It even had the benefit of being true. She just didn't mention how Tom was likely bedridden from sneezing bats far too much to be able to truly deal with such things. And if Tom just so happened to be consumed, leaving Harry tired and grieving as he begged for her warmth, well, that was of no consequence to her. Wasn't she just brilliant? Right then, can I get your attention, please? One of the DRG managers called out as the dwarves geared up for another day at work. It seems the world is under a bit of an infestation of Cornish pixies. Management needs all of you to suit up because we're going hunting. Oh yeah, rock and stone, one of the dwarves called out, prompting a round of cheers. Gunnar, on the other hand. Don't get any funny ideas, he told Driller with a stern expression. What? I didn't say anything, Driller told Gunnar with a smile. No, but you were thinking it, Gunnar patted his buddy on the shoulder. Now let's go kill these new bugs, yeah? Hell yeah, brother, Driller chuckled. With that, they swapped their loadouts and made their way deeper into the Forge world. Around every single nest of Cornish pixies, weapons of terrible and horrifying nature were unleashed, killing entire swarms of them over and over again. Yet even as they did this, not one time did they manage to get them all. So the problem grew and exacerbated itself over and over until the dwarves hired the wizards and the toad yokai, who went out of their way to decimate them further. Soon, cat yokai got involved, and even owl and raven yokai. But for some strange reason, the pixies refused to entirely die out. However, they certainly made for a damn good food source regardless, and a lot of plant yokai were very happy with their new source of nutrients to help them grow more food for the people. Even so, it was certainly dangerous to enter dark areas and tight spaces, necessitating the need for armor and drones at all times. And to think I thought that we were already having it bad enough, Tom groaned. This is going to be rough to deal with. And it was. Having heard of all the chaos that had been unleashed on Tom's Forge world, Odin had made his way over with a new type of weapon that could be installed on his station to sterilize it of all living things after his people evacuated. Surely it would be the perfect thing to solve his issues, but when he stepped out of the elevator to see his long-time friend in his infirmary ward, he was met face to face with a young man in dark robes, with a white painted face, black makeup, and spikes on every corner of his armor beneath it. It was such a terrible fashion choice that he simply stared at the man, a hand on his hip, and asked, "Is this the new fashion around here?" The man looked at him, stepped backwards through the oddly wooden door he had used, and apologized. "I'm so sorry. Wrong door," he claimed, and closed it behind him, the door vanishing as though it had never been. Odin grumbled to himself for a moment about strange beings, before deciding to come back another day. Home sweet home, 4 to 16. Bard was not as stupid as some people like to think he was. He knew he was being shunned and disrespected at every turn for having been as racist as he was, but they were only really proving him right in the end. Oh, he definitely knew how to shut his mouth by now, but in the past year or so of his time in military school, he had barely any sort of reprieve from racism being dished out to him either way. Yet, if he so much as sneezed in the presence of an unwashed cat boy, he was considered a racist prick for being allergic to their dandruff. Don't get him wrong, he had originally deserved the treatment for how rude he had been. But it had been years, and he had fought alongside his peers to combat invasive species and dark wizards more than once, especially when they happened to somehow spawn in near their school from the mysterious doors that happened to show up from time to time. It was a bit of a problem even, because even the instructors had noticed, and he was called out more often as a scapegoat for the yokai to take their aggression out on in spars. Something about uniting the team for a common cause or some bullshit. His father had come to visit often, and had actively told off the instructors and kids for letting it happen a few times. telling them that that shit would make them no better than the literal racist trash that the councillors were in his father's mind. But those lectures only lasted so long, and then it was back to being bullied for literally nothing but the mere memory of his first few months at the school. It didn't matter to them that he was trying to change, nor did it matter that he was doing his best not to lash out at them for ganging up on him every chance they got. He still was being harassed and bullied by them no matter what he did. However, there was a day when he was let out of the barracks for a day because he was needed to go collect the cleaning chemicals for the bathrooms, which were apparently in another facility nearby, and not actually on base for some strange reason. It wasn't in his best interest to question things, so he simply went out to grab them, and came across a catman sitting on a barrel of quat, which he needed to load onto the truck. "Oi, cunt! You still believe a little Nazi like you is going to get away scot-free?" the man asked with a strange accent. "Who are you and what do you want?" Bard asked him bluntly, utterly tired of all the bullshit. "I'm the guy who's going to beat your gay fucking ass until you realise that being a prick isn't worth it," the catman told him with a grin, adjusting his sunglasses and unbuttoning his pink Hawaiian t-shirt. "Or, you could suck my dick right here and now and I'll leave you be." "Bruh, I have a job to do right now," Bard told him bluntly. "If you want a fucking man to be your prostitute, it will have to wait, because if I don't get that cleaning chemical back to base right now, the smell of the toilets will cause my squad mates to choke." "Oh, good point," the catman grinned. "All right, I'll give you a pass on this one, but if I see that you've fucked up, I'll kill you myself." "Right, mind moving so I can grab the quat?" Bard asked the man, only for the man to disappear into thin air the moment he turned around to motion to the truck he needed to load. "Spooky," he sighed, before lifting the barrel and putting it on the truck with a grunt of effort. Looking round and seeing that there were no more of those there, he smiled. "I guess I'll have to tell them to stock more of these then, huh?" He shrugged, driving the truck out of the facility and over to the warehouse for the base where he placed it, with all the other ones. "What? I see you passed Aiden's test, huh?" one of the Oni sergeants grinned. "How about I get you a drink to help you forget about all this, yeah? My treat." "All right," Bard asked, a little confused about all of this. "But who's going to clean the mess in the bathroom?" "Don't worry, that baka Kakashi already cleaned it up. Just come with us, okay?" He grinned, another one of his buddies and Tengu following with a thumbs up. "We'll get you something special for proving that you can at least not be an ass when provoked." "Okay, if you say so, sir," Bard nodded. "Good, now let's go." The bar they went to was small, dingy, and more importantly off base. It was one that was filled with rowdy customers, and even had quite a few men, both thick and thin, giving lap dances to other male and female customers while wearing bunny suits. It was almost a paradise of debauchery to his eyes, and he wasn't entirely sure how to take that. Yeah, knew you would like this place," the Oni grinned. "We can all smell it when you get horny. It's why most of the boys bug you so much. They think you're into that shit and they don't know how to tease you properly." "Wait, what?" Bard asked with a curious gaze. "All right, I promised you a special drink and I'll buy you just one, the Bearfist Brew named after your Aunt Masubi. But be warned, this drink sure does pack a punch," the Tengu grinned. "Well, since you're offering, I won't say no, I guess," he nodded to them. "You heard him, waiter. Go grab us a Bearfist Brew for the first timer," the Oni cackled. "Oh, on it, master," the bunny dude grinned before dashing off. Soon, a beer was poured, and the frothy beverage made its way back over to him, with a nice and thematic mug and a fancy design in the foam. The two that had come with him smiled and egged him on. "Drink it up. Drain it in one shot, let's see you chug it." So he did, and once he was done, he looked at them with a triumphant grin. "That was pretty good. I might have to—" And then he felt it. A punch to the chin that sent him flying out of the restaurant, that had not come from a single resident there. Something that cracked his jaw and loosened several of his teeth in the process. Needless to say, he passed out from the pain. When he came to, the Kamatachi who had been mentioned earlier, Kakashi, was slowly carrying him back to base. His face had fixed itself, as expected of his magic at this point, and he was feeling a lot lighter than he did before, but he was also still very drunk. He wasn't quite sure if it was just his drunken state or not, but he could swear he felt a bit strange, like he had gained an extra appendage, and his ears were in the wrong spot or something. "I don't know what they did to you, but they're going to be court-martialed for that," Kakashi told him bluntly, "because they very nearly got you killed when they left you near a breeding nest of Cornish pixies." "Basters," Bard drunkenly slurred. "I'll get 'em next time." "No, you won't," Kakashi told him bluntly, "because they won't be allowed anywhere near you, ever again." "Heh, pretty silver," Bard grinned as he looked into Kakashi's eyes before he fell asleep on the spot. Soon after that incident, Tom found out that his son and his new friend Kakashi had gone around for the next several days clearing out Cornish pixies with ice magic and time magic, as apparently rewinding the clock on those things made it so they were never born, and ice made them drop to the ground and shatter. Deep Rock Galactic had apparently been using such methods for quite some time, but there just wasn't enough dwarves and dwarven guns to take them all out permanently until they realised these bugs were not magic resistant. Suffice to say, a Kitsune had a blast clearing out the remaining pockets in the world. And with that, the pixie problem was dealt with. Mostly. Some people had kept some as pets so they could eat them or feed them to their yokai friends. And as you'd expect from this, a few more outbreaks happened from time to time. But at the very least, they could be dealt with swiftly. Now hopefully his son would be a little more willing to see reason, now that he had awakened to his own heritage by sheer necessity. Even if the reason was incredibly shitty. After all, why be racist towards yokai if you're a yokai yourself? Home Sweet Home 4-17, Interlude. Chapter of Shenanigans, Perseus Vetter and the Attempt to Assert Dominance, the Darkest Lord. Perseus Vetter was an ambitious man. He knew better than all of his peers, and he had the hunger the drive needed to truly rise up the ranks of Lord Grindelwald's closest allies. Something no other could truly claim in the end. Indeed, he knew that he was perfect for the job, that he would be the only one who could coordinate the attack on Tom's worlds in a way that was meaningful and did long-lasting damage to his people. Of course, as the darkest of Dark Lords, Perseus Vetter was not one to easily give up when a few of his lesser minions failed to achieve their mission by spreading doxes and pipe foxes in boxes filled with all sorts of magical creatures to the world over time. Like his personal favourite, the infinitely regenerating boars he had personally enhanced and cloned from the flesh of an ancient Norse beast. Somehow, however, the doxes became a delicacy to the life forms there, as they decided to turn the most toxic things he knew of into alcohol. On top of this, the pipe foxes all gathered under the leadership of the ruler of that world and set up a peaceful colony that helped boost the economy according to his spies, and the boars had been well received as a source of infinite bacon. He was frustrated, so he sent in a few of his minions to cause chaos. Some of them were just shot by security and died in a spray of gore. A few of them walked into a pit of flames that was clearly meant as a death trap for invaders, regardless of the obvious signs, and a few took a wrong turn in the sewers as they tried to plant some form of bomb, only to be caught by a horde of Cornish pixies and devoured entirely. Not once was the leader of the world so much as woken up from his nap, or messaged during afternoon tea. Everything was handled entirely for him, and the man wasn't so much as inconvenienced. One of his sons walked into what was apparently a place called Pretty Boy Paradise, where men were dressed in bunny suits and forced to dance for other men. It sent chills down his spine as he heard about how they captured his boy, his poor sweet boy, and demanded they work for him. That he could either serve customers beer that would knock them out while dancing, or die a terrible death to the horrid security on the odd metal world. So with all other options out of the way, he amassed an army and went to take the world by force and retrieve his son along the way. Yet, as his people ran through the halls, casting their signature magics at all the wiring and piping they could see in the section they had been spat out in, which was admittedly very little for an entire planet, he supposed, he realised something rather important. Not a single spell was getting through any of the equipment. It all simply splashed off without a scratch. And then the screams of his army rang in his ears as they were devoured one by the acid spray from a giant insect. How preposterous. It shouldn't even be able to fit in there. Yet even so, he had a job to do. So he used his magic to gather a pile of tools left behind and bring a wrench to his hand, sneaking off to the nearest pipe with a look of fury and hate dominating his face. He would cause some measure of problem, so help him, Merlin, and thus he tried to unscrew a bolt. Oh dear Merlin, did he try. But it was too strong for him, and exhausted and wary, he threw the wrench just before he saw something out of the corner of his eye. A massive wrench, and an equally massive alien arm slamming through him, from his skull downwards. Needless to say, he wasn't expecting to become a ghost in such a violent way. "Oh great," he heard the alien grunt. "Not only did you manage to stick around, you did so in a way that means I can't actually hurt you." He laughed. It was perfect. He could finally do his job. "Better start running before I call Sally." Her and her husband, Lord Countington, are great at catching dumbasses who escape death, and the last one was sold to Fleur to use as materials for a new robe, the alien threatened. But it was all false bravado. Truly, he would be free to do his work in peace. Suit yourself, the alien shrugged. The next 15 minutes of his unlife were very unfortunate. A day in the life of Odin or Lex. Today was a good day. Things were all green in the new supplementary reactors, the tripled battery banks helping keep the new industries on 24 hours a day, regardless of anyone's electricity usage. It was somewhat odd having to get used to 24-hour days when he was used to time on Shang-Chi, but it was apparently a magically viable number that made a lot more sense to use than 21, for example, as most of his residents were from Earth. Made a lot of sense, to be honest. It also meant that he could simply move to another sector via the Hyperloop if he wanted to be up a little longer, since it was dead simple to use, and fast as hell. He didn't mind that at all. Still, he did his best to keep things quiet when he was in a sector that was in sleep mode. Didn't want to wake the neighbours after all. Speaking of neighbours, a good section of sectors 9 through 7, at least on the lower end, were all pretty dead set on making themselves into the engineering sector. Mostly because those were the areas he had training schools set up down there. He had gained a lot of really valuable workers from there, and even one very lost and confused Terminid that was more than happy to help when he gave it a job to do. Cost him a hell of a lot to feed it, but it did the work of 10 of his Krogan boys, or about 20 or so humans any day, and never complained about overtime. All in all, life was good, and honestly he was right where he wanted to be. This was indeed his home sweet home, just like Tom had promised him. He wouldn't change it for the world, besides maybe a few upgrades later down the line. After all, once an engineer, always an engineer. Home Sweet Home 4-18. I'm telling you, Uncle Tom, it would be much, much easier to deal with all of the things we had to worry about in Shang-Chi than to deal with the things in this universe. Plus it would give me a bit of a break, Harry claimed as walked around the sleek office, pacing back and forth in the dim purple lighting. This was something Tom knew deep down. In fact, he was trying to actively set things up so they could return to the other universe they had been in. But he had spent a lot of time trying to prepare his world for the test jump back to their previous universe in case of mishaps, for the sake of ensuring that they could track and return to previous worlds just in case. But did Harry really have that hard of a time? The man could have brought plenty of their mercenaries with them, like the Asari-led mercenary team that liked to explore their new galaxy and fight off any invaders they might end up having to deal with, like the elves of this universe. Harry, what's been happening in that world while we've been gone? He asked his nephew with a confused expression. He knew it didn't have the same effect he'd come to enjoy when he tilted his head if he didn't have his fox ears out, so he refrained, though it was certainly harder than he would have liked it to be. I have had to deal with no less than 13 invasions on Shang-Chi by various faction leaders in the Systems Alliance, including not only the newly coined Federated Commonwealth, but also the Draconis Empire and the so-called clans. They're all universally trying to capture our people to study them for the sake of making super weapons of some sort, to defeat Super Palavan, who apparently screwed them over massively in the last little while, and they're all backed by MBI from what I understand. Harry told him with a groan. Well, that certainly didn't sound good, but there was more. On top of this, there have been multiple reports from the Citadel that their best counsellor for humanity, Aiden Betaballs, and their favourite Asari counsellor Tivus, has been kidnapped by our people according to them, and they are gearing up for a war with Shang-Chi in response, he continued, running his hand down his face as he slumped forwards. Tom sighed. Are they truly that idiotic? He asked with a raised eyebrow. It's been years since they made their declaration that they'd be coming with us. It wasn't even something that had happened out of nowhere, as they had planned it out for months and made sure to tell everyone they likely wouldn't be back. Yes, Harry groaned, and the worst part is, their minds have mostly been restructured by their local version of nanoms that have apparently gone rogue, which means you are essentially buggered all to hell if you don't have Asgardian nanoms to help you deal with the nasty little buggers. Bloody hell, Tom agreed, and that shit needs to be dealt with, and fast. I agree, Harry nodded. Also, that reminds me. He leaned forwards a little and spoke quietly. You speak more like an American than a Brit, so you'd probably be perfect to deal with that one girl, Jane Shepherd, and keep her from trying to molest me in front of Karasuba. Wait, what the hell? Harry continued, revealing more and more horrifying lore that he really didn't need to know. She's been almost as much of a problem as her brother John, though they have never met. Yet it's still very much an issue considering the shit they've gotten up to in the galaxy, and the fact that both of them are trying to seduce me. Okay, why? Tom asked him, almost convinced that his nephew was messing with him. Because apparently the thought of banging a guy who has genuinely fucked death is appealing to them, and I have no idea how they know that fact, Harry whispered, as though he was afraid for anyone else to hear it. Oh. Wait, what was that? What the shit did you just say? Tom asked him carefully. You did what? It was a mistake, Harry grimaced. Because she genuinely liked it so much that she's gotten it in her head that anyone who can take me away from her must die, regardless of who they might be. Well, shit. He would have to tread carefully around Harry then, because while they might be ageless, they could all certainly still die. Besides Harry, apparently, because that was a revelation and a half to hear. But it was hopefully fine. He had bigger things to worry about regardless. Well then, since we're ready to go back to the previous universe, I will inform our allies of our departure and see if any of them might like to join us before we go, he mentioned, working his jaw as he thought about what needed to be done. Hopefully we can get whatever modifications we need to do to our world done before things get too spicy in this universe for us, and we need to dip without preparation. You know, it's times like this if I wonder if the world got all of its language from you, or if you somehow managed to predict the trends of everyone in the world, Harry shook his head. But yes, just keep what I said about John and Jane in mind, and try to help me get rid of them before they try anything with me in the future, and end up turning to ash and dust. Tom nodded. I'll help you with your sex life troubles if you agree to never share the details of your sexcapades with me, he told Harry bluntly. Because while you're family, and I love you as family, I really don't want to hear about how you fucked a primordial concept's brains out. All right, Uncle, Harry chuckled. Tell me when you're ready for the transfer so I can be here. Will do, Tom said, watching as Harry opened a door mid-air and disappeared through it. They don't even need walls now, Tom shivered. This was going to be something he'd need to keep a better eye on, because Aiko was certainly fucking with him at this point. Something told him that he should have contacted her for coffee a few times over the years to appease her. Maybe it wasn't too late. When Odin heard that his longtime ally and friend Emperor Thomas Richard Harrison was going to take his world back to the previous universe he had been to, he told Tom that he wished to bring all of Asgard along. Of course, Tom allowed it, and a section of the surface of the world was reconfigured to allow Asgard to dock their entire world there. In response, the dwarves pulled apart a few of their favourite mining worlds and attached them together to form Svartalfheim, which they also attached to the outside of Tom's world. A world that had no name of its own as of yet. He knew that Tom was a little preoccupied with other things, so he didn't press for a name, yet he couldn't help but wish to name the world Helheim, for the sake of all the demonic beings and alien life forms that lived in his world. If only Tom would allow it, that was what he would name the planet. Tom was happy to allow them to do what they pleased with the outside of his world, so long as they brought better firepower to the world and were able to detach their realms from his world in the case of a major emergency. He also required that they give him the blueprints for their worlds, in case it was lost in some way, so he could recreate them with the materials in whatever universe he found himself within, especially in the case that some of them might wish to move on from his rule and stay behind with their world in one of the ones they happened to find themselves liking. After all, if they enjoyed themselves and wished to stay, why would he force them to leave with him? It was honourable and quite thoughtful of him, especially knowing that such a thing could cause a few mass exoduses from his world, if his people found the universe they were in nicer than his world. Which may indeed very much be the point. However, the best part in all of this was that this meant that his world might one day no longer look like a gleaming metal war machine in space, but instead bear the external appearance of a habitable and unassuming planet, allowing it to better fit into any universe he decided to finally settle down in, which was likely to be crucial in the end. Of course, the core of the Forge world that Tom had created would need to be upgraded soon as well, and Odin had an idea on how to do such a thing. He would create a star within the world that could be contained. The plasma from it could be piped throughout the world and used to heat and energize various sectors with more power than they were currently capable of. Sure, with the magical metamaterials they had, the reactors were quite adequate for what they currently ran, but something such as this would truly let the dwarves enjoy themselves. After all, when your forge was heated by the power of an entire star, you could surely make some truly wondrous things, but that was for a future project. For now, he was here to dock his world with Tom's and see about how they might work together in his other universe as allies. What was the name he'd come up with for the other universe? Ah yes, he remembered. The Mass Effect universe, aptly named for the effect that their rarest material created. Truly, a material with a mass of 0? Something of that nature should be impossible. Yet it was there, and it was truly something that was notable in that universe, that could indeed be replicated once he knew the material's atomic structure, as Tom had explained. Such things fascinated him, and he was quite interested in reaching out to the people of that universe to see what they might be able to come up with regarding potential uses, if only to satisfy his curiosity and attain the wisdom he sought so fiercely. Of course, he would be more than interested in helping with the Dark Lord invasions on Tom's world as much as he could, until his people found a universe that they would like to settle down in. Or until he grew old and weary and needed to choose a successor. Odin was no fool. He knew very well the consequences of cloning oneself repeatedly without some form of assurance, some backup that could be maintained at all times. And with how unfortunate the last attempt at keeping such things backed up was, they had made sure to instead spread their seed naturally and create new life for themselves. After all, if a child was born from their bodies, they should be allowed to take residence in their minds truly. Tom warned him that such things might not work out as he expected, but he had run all the variables. Just like Tom had his ancestor with him installed on his cybernetics to help him throughout his days, so too would they be with their children, their grandchildren, and even their great-grandchildren, helping shape and guide them for the future generations. This meant that with time, his people would gain a memory stretching far beyond their years, and that it would allow them to enjoy lessons from long past, so that they might experience less hardship than all those prior. Well, at least so long as they truly heeded those lessons in the end. If they didn't, it was all on them what kind of messes they would get themselves into, and what kind of troubles they might face. Surely it would work out as well as he hoped. After all, he had already thought of all the contingencies that needed to be put into place, and made plans for abuse of such. What more could he do but try? The dwarves in general, for the most part, were ecstatic. Sure, the vast majority had decided to stay behind, but there were plenty of them that had decided to come with, and they had managed to use the magic of hoxes and the properties of the minerals there to make it so that their mines would forever be filled, at least so long as there was mass and energy for their crystals to grow in the world of Svartalfheim. Some of the glyphids had been brought along as well, as a way to ensure there was plenty to hunt, along with various other monstrous creatures from the Dwarven worlds to inhabit sections of their new world, things that would spawn frequently and in large numbers, and give the world plenty of food to be self-sufficient from the main Forge world if necessary. In fact, the only reason there were dwarves who wished to stay behind was so they could continue their war against the elves without the Asgard taking offence to the entire universe being at war. They were quite confident in their chances to win as well, which was a good sign. Of course, Tom was happy to enable trade between the ones who came with, his mind filled with as much greed as the best of them. But the man was also more than willing to part with some of his fur from his tail after his wives brushed it thoroughly clean, and considering the uses of magical beast fur, this was an incredible boon to them. All of the master armourers and weaponsmiths that had simply arrived for the sake of joining such a generous benefactor, who would allow them to ask for and barter with the magical creatures below to gain powerful reagents to use for their creations, things that would allow them to create legendary works that would become well known among their peers. That alone was incentive for many dwarves to come along with Tom when he transferred his world to the new universe, especially because the world was a forge world. It was made to make spaceships, space stations, and massive amounts of other products that would take the people of Tom's world to much, much greater heights in the end. And they would be there to see it all. Of course, the dwarves from Deep Rock Galactic were proud to say that they had been alongside Tom when he announced his intentions, and that they, the children of Ivaldi, had taught Tom personally. Hopefully this would become a long-lasting and productive partnership. Don't you agree, Aiko? Yes. Home Sweet Home 4-19. Citizens of our world, please head to your homes in a timely manner and close any feeds or devices showing the outside world, Tom told them with a patient smile as he stood in front of the podium for the news broadcast. Devices that were used to observe the void between universes last time all malfunctioned, and the people viewing them generally went certifiably insane, and we do not wish such harm upon our people as a result of the world transfer. He paused and slowly had the power diverted from all the sectors, besides the power going to vital things like the life support and the broadcasted holograms around the inner world to keep people calm. We are initiating a transfer back into the previous universe to test and ensure we can move backwards on a multiversal scale if we like a previous world better than the one we're in at that moment. A bunch of people texted and responded to the transfer, calling in and asking various questions which he carefully kept off the screen, especially the ones that pertained to his sex life, asking various questions about it that he was wholly uncomfortable talking about in a serious broadcast. After everyone was essentially rounded up for the transfer, Tom grinned. "Now we shall proceed with the universal transfer in 3, 2, 1. The capacitors dumped their full charge into the transfer at that moment, pulling them from one universe to the next as smoothly as butter. It was as though one moment they were in one universe, dealing with one set of physics and laws, and the next they were in the universe they knew of before. Tom immediately noted just how jarring it was to have a completely different set of metaphysical laws of nature slammed through your very core all at once when the transfer was as fast as that was, and decided he was 100% going to have to come up with some way to counteract such things in the future. After all, what if he were to end up in a universe where life force was toxic, and thus the universe tried to kill everything that was still alive? Or where existence was simply painful, due to the forces of reality grinding down upon all those who enter? Or maybe the reality was a sentient being that fed off of intelligence and sapped wisdom, leading to every one of his people becoming actively dumber, which would certainly break his ability to do a lot of the things he desired to do in the future. For example, the last universe was flooded entirely with nanoms. This universe, on the other hand, was filled with psychic waves he only truly noted after having experienced it once and been gone for a while. Something was out there, and his nanoms were a direct threat to its subtle control. He immediately made the decision to ensure every single person who came near his world was infected with more than enough nanoms to protect themselves. After all, if he didn't do that, so many things could go wrong for him and his people. "Tom, there is a fleet of ships surrounding us, and the Asgard have decided to engage them after they shot at the world," Rossweiser called out to him over her comms device. "Your mother, Ashley, has decided to take her ship and enter the fighting manually as well for some reason, if she wasn't doing so damn well." "God damn it," Tom growled under his breath, gritting his teeth live on screen. "Apologies. It seems that the results and questions will need to wait until we—" he began, only to be interrupted by his partner for the little broadcast they were doing, turning on the cameras to an outside view. Was that Palaven and the Turians in the background? Had their calculations been that far off? This was quite ridiculous in his mind, and he quickly rushed towards the console to verify. Apparently his calculations didn't account for the drift of the Z-axis in relation to the galactic spin, and it was a damn lucky thing they didn't simply end up inside Palaven. Thankfully his system had noted that there was a celestial object in the way, and yeeted them several thousand kilometers away. Far enough that it would only be a minor inconvenience to the world below that they were inside the range to influence gravity on the planet, and not an imminent threat. Yet they were still willing to fire the closest equivalent to a relativistic kill vehicle at their planet, despite it still technically being in orbit of their homeworld, regardless of how dumb of an idea that was. Something Tom noted and was quite ware of, considering they didn't appear to have planetary shielding like his worlds tended to, especially with his layered adaptive triangular shield modules that would project a few layers of individual triangular shields a ways away from each other to catch and redirect incoming fire, so that if the enemy fired any type of weapon at them, they'd be able to hopefully analyze and strengthen themselves against said weapon before it actually hit them. It was a bit of redundancy that he thought absolutely necessary, even if his world had never been attacked directly with weapons up until now. On that note, it was good to see that the offset of the layers helped deflect a literal flying bolt of molten metal, fired at beyond the speed of light into their shields. If it wasn't for his desire to ensure his mother didn't get herself killed in the oncoming fight, he would have actually been more than willing to watch this go on for as long as possible to allow his planet to become eventually immune to such weapons. But his mother was out there in her ship, and the Asgardians fighting alongside her were not him, nor were they truly his, so he didn't want to rely on them to fight the battle for him. "Send out a retrieval squad and get her back here," Tom finally ground out. "She's had enough fun, and I'm not going to let her give me a heart attack by staying out there longer than necessary." "Understood, sir," the current Space Force commander began, his voice loud and clear over the comm network. "I'm actually on the ship with her, so I'll have her back by the time you know it." Tom sighed. This was why he didn't like trusting others. Why in the hell did this moron think it was a good idea to send his mother out to frontline combat and join him alongside the Asgardians without deploying the rest of the drone ships? It was madness, and made no sense to him whatsoever. Truly, he was incompetent, or so he thought. His mother fired one last round at a Turian super dreadnought that had gotten close to the planet, before returning to dock with the rest of the ship, many of the drones flying out the moment she was back within safe space. Which made it a good thing the planetary shields could be bypassed if you had the right IFF transponder and the correct security codes and identification. If it wasn't for his planetary sensors to scan for the DNA and life signals of the people on the ships, though, he would have been more worried that others could easily get in by stealing a ship from his people. As it was, the DNA verification from his ship was an added layer that helped speed up the process of letting people in to near instantaneous. Perfect for when there was an active fight going on. He made his way over to meet with his mother directly, getting into the executive room where he would meet her halfway, and sitting down with a sigh. His mother, Ashley, wasn't much longer, and while the fight went on outside, he ordered his planet and people to leave Turian space and go park near Shanxi, giving the Asgard the place they would be meeting up in a tightly compressed package. When she sat down across the meeting table from him, the dark purple glow of the mood lighting dimly glowing through the tense air, Tom spoke to her softly. "Mum, you can't go out and fight people directly with your ship unless it's an emergency with a capital E," he told her as gently as he could. "Because if your ship gets lost and you die, I will never forgive myself, let alone the people who got you into such a situation." "I'm a grown woman, Tom," she pointed out with a snort, "and your father approved of it as a way for me to blow off some steam before bed. I was in no danger at all, as the ship was. Crewed by our best men, I was just given control of the main gun and a few turrets from a relatively safe place within and told to have fun." "You can do all those things remotely," Tom pointed out, "and it will be much the same experience as this without any of the risk involved." "The risk was what made it more fun," she told him with a sigh. "But I understand. It's not like video game nights where, if I die, I can come back, so I should be more careful." "That's all I can ask, Mum," he told her, standing to go hug her. She grinned and patted his head between where his ears usually were, causing them to pop out from their hiding spots, and then as he froze she began to pet him, causing his tail to become unhidden and wag a little. It was his mother, so he was fine with it, but that didn't mean he was going to let her mess around for too long. He had a job to do after all, but maybe a few more minutes wouldn't hurt. "You're so cute like this," she told him with a smile. "I kind of want to play with your fox form more often too." Tom thought about it for a moment. "Well, if it will keep you out of trouble." And then he shape-shifted with a yip. "I can keep you company until my next meeting while the world is relocated to Shang-Chi's region of space." "Thank you, dear, it means a lot to me," she chuckled. "Now, who's a good boy?" This was going to be humiliating, he just knew it. It was a good thing that the Space Force commander didn't come into the meeting with them, right? Home sweet home 420, smoke weed, watch movies, and try to reconcile with Thor. You never know when you'll need a dumbass with a heavy hammer to smite your enemies for you. Odin. Odin had a plan. He wasn't sure if it was the most eloquent plan he had ever come up with, but considering their recent victory over the Turians and their subsequent declaration of victorious conquest and celebratory feasts as a result, he didn't think Emperor Tom would be able to blame him. Tom himself didn't hold himself as an emperor would, nor did he demand that people worship him as such, yet the title was no less true. As such, Odin felt it appropriate to bring a gift for his friend when he wished to propose an idea that might strengthen the bond of their two nations further, something that he desperately wanted to do, because he certainly wanted to have the capability to set up a permanent passage and bridge between their worlds, even though his people wished to stay until they solved the issues running rampant within this universe. Especially since he had no idea how long such an endeavour would take, and he rather liked Tom. His plan was simple. He would have Thor, who Emperor Tom had agreed was thoroughly punished by this point, meet with the man and partake in the weed of Valhalla. Odin would no longer deny Thor his doobie, and he would even offer Tom a few as well, and set them up in front of the big screen to eat snacks and watch a particularly fun set of movies he had seen on the local networks. Movies known to the people of this world as their version of Norse mythology. Of course, those instructional videos on how not to fail as a pantheon featuring Kratos were indeed very useful, and it could be used as a lesson by both of them on how to strengthen ties between nations without being a massive fuck-up. and how to smoke and drink responsibly. Otherwise, if they could not handle such a thing, he would have to keep Thor sober for longer, and that would simply be sad. After all, he was a good man, even if he used to be a woman-beater in one timeline. He had learned his lesson after the reset, and his millennia of life and sobriety. Yes, it was time his son learned an entirely different lesson, how to chill with the bros without being a massive dick, as the young ones might say. He puffed a ring of smoke out. This is good. It really is the grass of the gods. Odin could get used to this. Now where were his munchies? After Tom had experienced what Thor was like all those years ago, he wasn't sure he wanted the man anywhere near his mother. But Loki would be there with them, and Odin was adamant that they should get along to ensure proper cooperation between their nations, while the Asgard tried their best to fix a broken universe, starting with the Turians. The Turians, mind you, did not want to be fixed for the most part. They just realised that they had effectively lost the war, and that all the colonies they had were slowly being converted into proper homes for them and their client races that would actually support a healthy way of life, so they didn't argue as much as they could have. And while Tom wasn't one to judge his people for their hobbies, to him, fixing an entire universe like they're some sort of warrior farmers might be a bit much. But at least they had found some way to help keep their culture strong and help their people gain a foothold in the galaxy. That might simply be what Tom needed to help keep things from escalating beyond what they could all handle, especially because it seemed as though any world he set up a presence in was able to travel back to him via the room of a requirement at this point, regardless of what universe it was in, and the metaphysical barriers there should be blocking such a thing, something he was very much not okay with. Still, as he settled in on the couch with Loki and Thor, a blunt in each of their hands and plenty of food on the table, he couldn't help but feel as though he was missing something, that someone else was present that he was supposed to notice, yet didn't for some reason. A thick presence hung over them, as though to watch them and mess with them in some way, and Loki seemed to smirk at Tom every time he brought it up. Case in point, partway through, watching Avengers 1, he spoke up with a grin. "I for one do not believe that I am the one burdened with glorious purpose in this universe," he grinned, patting Tom on the shoulder. "However, I might know someone who does have the attention of the gods." "Really?" Tom asked curiously. "Who's that?" Loki looked at him like he was a particularly dumb puppy and began patting his head furiously. "Hey! What the hell?" he yelped, trying to escape Loki's petting. It was weird for the man to do this, regardless if he'd become a Kitsune or not, especially because he still looked very much like a man at the moment. Thor took that moment to interrupt the two of them. "I think I like the actor's armour," the prince claimed. "I should grow my hair longer and wear armour like his to inspire the youth to bravery. I don't know how you've been since I last spoke to you, so I can't say how that would turn out," Tom began warily. "But if you want to try a new style, I can recommend you to the Cold Star Luxury Resorts offshoot, the Stylish Faux Spa." "Stylish Fox Spa?" Thor asked with a hint of curiosity. "I've never heard of it. Is it like the Stylish Faux Spa?" "No, they just spell fox as though they were using the French word faux for some reason," Tom chuckled. "It tends to confuse a lot of people when they first read it." "I could certainly use some brushing myself, my little champion," a voice called out from behind him, causing shivers to go up and down his spine. Oh, crap. Aiko?" he asked with a tilt of his head as he looked back at her. The golden fox goddess looked down on him with a grumpy glare. "Yes, me." "Can I offer you some coffee?" he tried carefully. "Yes, and then you can spend the rest of the day brushing my tails," Aiko nodded. "Or else I'll send you off to a new world without the rest of your world and lock you there until you pay more attention to me." Tom panicked. This Kitsune bitch was 100% an issue, but since he had made a contract with her, he had no choice but to finally start fulfilling his end of the deal, to actually pray to her from time to time. "Well, I'll make you a coffee right away," he sighed, as a coffee appeared in Aiko's hand from one of his house elves. With the coffee in hand, she was immediately attacked by flying brushes that began to untangle her fur rapidly as she panicked and tried to drink her coffee without spilling it. It was a humorous sight, and one he figured he would probably pay dearly for allowing to happen soon after. However, for the time being, he could only take another puff of weed and enjoy the occasion, at least until all the tails grabbed him. Home Sweet Home 421. When the Asgardians had conquered the Turians, they demanded that they all return to civilian lifestyles and lay down all their arms. Unfortunately, the very first thing that was asked was the very question of how do I civilian? Such a question was unprecedented, and many Asgardians had no idea how to handle the presented query. In fact, one might say that they had been entirely flummoxed by the insinuation that the people of Super Palaven might indubitably be incredibly and unfortunately extremely, by the spirits. Just summarize it for me already, Saren groaned, looking at the VI that had been trying to teach him how his people were doing back on his homeworld. It was frustrating trying to code anything remotely similar to a VI, because they generally had to be tweaked and modified until they could give relevant information when asked. It was annoying, and he wished he had Tom there to help him finish his project, because say what you will about the man, he was certainly better at this than he was. Of course, Tom was away somewhere, doing something important with his goddess according to Loki, but he was unfortunately not quite sure what said thing was. It would require some form of investigation later, because he was pretty sure that whatever this goddess was, she seriously was getting in the way of their work plans. "What are you thinking about, Saren?" Lex asked with a slight grin as he made his way into the workspace. "You look a bit out of sorts." "Just thinking about how Tom had promised he'd work on this with me to prepare for my people to become more than what they were. Yet he's off gallivanting with some woman," Saren grunted, his brow furrowed as he typed away at his keyboard. "Huh, getting a little lonely now," Lex chuckled. "I get it, though. He's been a bit busy for a while now, and I kind of miss hanging out with him myself." Saren focused in on his work. "It's not like I care what he does with his time. I would just prefer it if he didn't waste mine." "Ha ha 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 ha," Lex laughed at him, slapping his massive knee as he bent over with a wide grin. "What's so funny?" Saren asked, not understanding what Lex was laughing at all. It simply wasn't funny in the slightest. "Nothing, Saren, just keep being yourself," Lex chuckled, making his way back out of the room with a grin. "I wish I had a camera for that one. Bard would have gotten a good laugh." Saren groaned at that. Of course Bard would. The brat was always willing to mess with people now that he had a new Kamitachi friend who was training alongside him. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. While he'd like to continue working on the V as much as possible before that smug bastard came in and lent him a hand, he had come to realize that he was going to need a lot more than just his own brain to figure this one out regardless. So he did the next best thing and called up Nearless. "Surely this couldn't go wrong." "You need to find a hobby." "What's a hobby?" "Oh, the Kami above, how do you not know what a hobby is?" "I like my guns. I don't want to give them all away." "You kill people for fun." "Because it is fun." It was utter chaos. The Turians were generally completely unwilling to adapt to their new lifestyle on Palaven. The colonies genuinely had no clue how to function without being told what to do, and every client race of the Turians was kept in such hostile conditions that when the Turians were no longer in control of themselves, they each demanded to be made the masters of said race. Whether they claimed it was their divine right, or they had genuine reasons, they were summarily denied as a whole, because they were the Asgardians now, for good or ill. Of course, this led to the Asari matriarch Tivos having to come down and crack a few skulls rapidly herself, to keep things from escalating into a civil war, or something equally asinine over things like what video games should replace their wartime activities. Thankfully, Helldivers 6 was set to come out soon, and they would be more than capable of playing that in VR to relive their glory days soon enough. If it wasn't for the genius that came up with giving them a mandatory hobby, however, they might have had infighting a lot sooner. As it was, it had taken a few days before such things broke out, and they were relatively contained in the end. Tevos sighed, cracking her neck as she looked at the new councillors, who had decided that she should come back as an advisor, along with Councillor Udina, who had been the one to propose that they put a price on Tom's head for the apparent kidnapping of her and poor Aiden. Which was funny, because she distinctly knew that Aiden was a Schrodinger's cat, which meant he could have shown up at any time he chose if he so wished. At least, so he claimed. Yet the man had felt no need to bother, and that had meant that Udina was selected as the next councillor for the Systems Alliance. A rather unfortunate decision on their part, but nothing they couldn't handle. Of course, she was well aware that they had their reasons for demanding a witch hunt over Tom, but she was quite done with all of it. "You, all three of you," she told them with a snide look, "are morons, in every sense of the word." "What?" Udina asked with a hint of anger. "You heard me," she grunted. "You are all idiotic fools who have nothing better to do than to sit with their thumbs up their asses while they send their top spectres on a wild goose chase to find out the things you already know and have been told, which was that we were resigning from our post to go explore a new universe, with the potential that we may be unable or unwilling to return. And how are we supposed to know? The Solarian councillor asked. Our lives aren't long enough to... I left several recorded messages with both the council and around the world, made a public speech seen across the galaxy, and set my sister up to control all of my assets. Yet you still question me. Tivos sighed. There is literally no way that any of you are fit to be councillors. I'm voting that you all submit to medical examination by licensed professionals of my choice to ensure that you haven't been infected with brain rot disease just in case. We literally cannot let such madness infect the people, so I'll have to ask that we all quarantine ourselves in case we might have indeed caught such a thing, as a good friend of mine, Ashley Harrison, once had. And she was genuinely worried, because for all intents and purposes, there was no way in hell that they should be this stupid. It was ridiculous. How could they assume such things when the proof was right in front of their faces? Very well, for your sake as one of our former councillors, we shall submit ourselves for a medical examination. The current Asari councillor nodded. After all, if it truly is the case that we missed such important knowledge when it was right in front of our noses, there may be something very, very wrong, and we should take care not to infect the galaxy with it. Indeed, the Solarian councillor nodded in thought. The results of such a thing could be catastrophic, perhaps even leading some civilizations back to the Stone Age, if it is some form of biological weapon targeted at higher functions. What kind of madness are you all talking about? Odin growled. Can't you see she's trying to buy time for her people to cover her tracks? It's ludicrous to believe her at her word. And perhaps this is worse than we think it is, the Asari councillor gulped. Tivos nodded, palming her face. After a moment, she sent off a message to Ashley to get a team of medics in full biohazard protection gear to help clear them, just in case, and for them to bring extra nanoms to help in case the rest of the Citadel was also infected. Hopefully the medical team I just sent here will be with us soon, Tivos sighed, because I don't want to know what might happen otherwise. Home sweet home, 4-22. Within Aiko in one of her inner realms, Tom sighed as he looked at all the fanfare and showiness that the fox goddess was putting up for him. She definitely wanted him to play with her, given that she had spawned a carnival world with various shows and games for them to try, but with the way she was clinging to him, it was clear that she didn't actually want to separate from him long enough from them to do so either. At one point she pointed to a massive spin the wheel option and giggled. Look, we can try this one, if you don't want to be forced to cuddle with me and brush me for the next 10 centuries to make up for your neglect. You can go on a random adventure with me. Tom suspected that this was actually her goal, especially as the wheel had some rather worrying options on it, like outfucking Slanesh, beating Lelouch v Britannia at Paradox, Billiards Vostroyan Roulette 4th, Dimensional Hypercube Chess Strip Poker, and one upping the Doomslayer by speedrunning hell and beating his kill streak. Can I pay you back over time while focusing on other things? Tom asked worriedly, as she reached up and grabbed the wheel with her clawed fingers, holding him hostage in her tail so he could not escape her grasp. No way, silly, she poked him on the nose. It's either do this random adventure for me, or become fat on my ass for 1,000,000 years. That's even worse than last time, Tom groaned. So what's it going to be, Toom? Aiko giggled. Fine, spin the wheel, Tom grumbled. Just make sure I make it back in one piece and relatively sane. Live a little, Tom. You might just find yourself having fun, Aiko giggled, tickling her ribs with her tails. She spun it, the wheel turning around and around until it came to a stop on the tiniest sliver of space between instant death by Snoo and riding Aiko's phallus to the moon. Pouting for a moment, she took out the card that was on that space and held it up to her face to read it. It looks like the adventure we're set to go on is a mission to kill zombie Hitler and at least 42 of his secret minions, Aiko told him with a small grin, kissing him on the cheek. Wait, what? Tom asked, not entirely sure how she was planning to accomplish this. If you do it right, I'll even help you learn how to use magic by firing bullets laced with your own live enchantments, if you're up for a challenge. Aiko grinned, poking him in the ribs. It will be fun. You know you wanna. Tom couldn't exactly deny that he wanted to learn how to fire enchanted bullets without inscribing runes onto them beforehand. It would be something that would help tremendously in the end, and he would very much like to be able to pull such things off regularly. Bullets were cheap, in every sense of the word, so being able to fire bullets that could contain magical effects would be absolutely incredible, especially ones that were prepared on the spot rather than in advance. See, I told you that it's fun, Aiko giggled. So take this gun and let's get going, she told him, handing him a Lanchester submachine gun and a Colt M1911. Now kiss me so I can give you the basics and you can figure out the rest while we fight. Ari? Psh. He was cut off by a horny vixen invading his mouth as she pumped knowledge directly into his mind forcibly with her magic, her eyes glowing with a faint green flame as she poured something into him he wasn't sure he should be seeing alongside it. He could feel his tail come back out and start entwining with hers as she kissed him. The strange feeling of knowing she really did mean it every time she said she'd eat him up, flooding his mind and making him rather afraid, but somehow somewhat excited. It was like he had something somewhat stir within him, and he wasn't sure how to handle that knowledge. Soon, she broke the kiss and smiled, swallowing something of him down as she smiled as well, causing him to realize something rather important. She had taken the knowledge of who his children were in his past life from him. She had taken it and consumed it as though it were an edible concept, along with the last of his humanity. He shivered. Why? He asked her with a hint of fear. Equivalent exchange, Aiko giggled. Or something like that. I really just wanted to have access to those memories so I could play with your family soon. I figured they might have been somewhat interesting as playthings, so I was hoping they would be. That sounds like a goddess, all right, Tom recognized carefully. Of course. I'm shaped by your perception of me to a degree after all, she giggled. Which means I can't be trustworthy, because you don't trust me to be so. So I gotta do sneaky shit as part of your reward for your worship for me and your belief. Tom realized the implications immediately, and resolved to try to test that as soon as he had the chance. Could he truly manipulate this goddess by simply believing her to be better, or would she essentially just follow whatever the majority thought? Was she even telling the truth? Ha ha ha. It's thoughts like that that make it hard to do nice things for you without doing something sneaky in return, my little champion, Aiko giggled at him. Especially when I have so little faith from you, it isn't even funny. After a moment, she chuckled, allowing him to sink in again. At least your son, Bard, seems to be rather faithful. Though he is a bit racist and really horny. I might have to take him for myself when he grows up. Tom tried to struggle, but was swallowed up by the floof and spat out in the middle of a war zone with his gun strapped to him in a military outfit. And Aiko, the sneaky bitch, was nowhere to be found. Instead, he stood before a yokai with black-nailed clawed digits, long tied-back hair, and purple and orange wizarding robes. He rubbed his beard as he looked at Tom with an amused smile, oddly reminiscent of Aiko. Well, shall we begin? Months had passed. This Kurama fellow, apparently Aiko's older brother, and the concept of the unknowable chaos itself, was quite a boon to helping him learn how and where to shoot his gun, while also how to add rather interesting effects to the bullets and guns themselves. As a result, every time the Germans were about to discover them getting closer and closer to Hitler's secret base, he gunned them down with silenced bullets that all carried the instant death effect, which seemed to be about the quickest way to ensure they stayed dead. Because yes, apparently they had come across a base filled with Nazi zombies, and they had to fight their way through every single one of these things to get rid of them all. Thankfully, with Kurama slicing them in half with a massive magical blade, they generally didn't have the ability to follow after them if they needed to run from time to time, especially with how surgical the man's strikes were in the end. One might not think that such a word would be used for a man wielding a giant magical buster sword, but it was indeed the case. It was like watching a master in the art of swordplay at work, but Tom had no clue what sword fight was like in the first place, so he wasn't able to tell if what he was doing was pure mastery, or simply some mystical bullshit that whatever type of yokai he was could pull off. Tom assumed he was a Kitsune, but he was hiding his features for the sake of ensuring that they were less likely to be caught. Or so he claimed, despite his flashy appearance. Perhaps he needed an update on his glasses prescription. He did appear to need them to see things that were too far away from him after all. At least Tom had some backup that wasn't Aiko. Because Aiko was busy squirming in his pocket as a tiny fox that watched and barked when he was not paying enough attention and nearly ended up getting caught. Yet as he entered the final room of the base and saw a mechanized, zombified Hitler strapped to a table and struggling to get free, Tom simply raised his M1911 and put the poor bastard out of his misery. With that, he sighed and looked at the tiny fox goddess. What now? He asked her gently, not sure what to do. Remember that time you gave Dumbledore a gun? Aiko asked as she transformed back, playing with her phone with a smile. Yeah? Tom asked with a chuckle. Well, he just shot Grindy with it, Aiko told him. Kurama chuckled at them. Well, I'm a peace out. "Don't leave your phone behind again like last time, sis," he said as he faded out. "I have a bad feeling about this," Tom began. About that." Aiko blushed sheepishly. "Fuck! Where is it?" Tom asked with a horrified expression. "I lost my old phone while I was watching YouTube shorts back in Britain," Aiko stated, her eyes watering. "I'll find it later. Let's get you back home." "Wait, this is important." Once again, he was grabbed by fluffy tails. "Damn it, Aiko!" Dr. Heisenberg von Doom was an incredibly intelligent man. He enjoyed his little experiments back in Germany when he was a medical student before the war, and he certainly loved working in the psychology department where he could continue them until the end of his days, so long as he proved useful. He enjoyed all sorts of fun little things, like testing how electrical shocks burn their way through the brains of those with autism. Oh, the delight he found in carving through their little skulls while they were still aware to study how the electrical burn scrambled their thoughts. It was rather fun, but not quite as fun as this neat new device he had been gifted by the gods. This Samsung seemed so wonderfully filled with content that was perfectly suited for torturing young minds, turning them into wrecks as they become unable to focus for more than a few minutes, due to this short-form content that was so prevalent throughout its memory banks. Something he was quick to test on all of his patients before long, when the magical police, the auras they called themselves, caught up to him and claimed he was using a magical torture and brainwashing method. He simply asked that they watch the videos and ascertain for themselves if it was truly torture, or if it was perhaps a bit of fun for the people he worked with to enjoy, a reward for furthering the medical industry with their willing sacrifice. The wizards were indeed dumb enough to watch it while they locked him away, but they did something incredibly stupid in the process. They gave it magic in an attempt to recharge it, accidentally causing the short-form content to mutate into something truly interesting. Brain rot. It caused the people who had watched it to grow a sort of nigh invisible magical fungus that could only be detected via the most delicate of magics, and acted to lower the intelligence and functionality of every single being that was nearby when it was being broadcast. Of course, he was infected as well. He could feel his intelligence being drained away slowly, bit by the horrifying fungus, yet this wasn't enough for him. So he created plans. Plans for a world united under the Rosalis Federation. A world free of higher thought beyond the need to consume. A perfect plan, with no flaws whatsoever. For real, 100% no cap, on God. His skibidi-riz would flood the world with gyat and gigachads, leaving nothing but Sigma for the people he wished to lead. And his plan would start with Ohio. Truly, he was smart. Brilliant even. He would, assuming direct control. Kitsune. I wrote most of this when I was dead fucking tired, so excuse the mess. I will maybe expand upon it in an omeki later, but I'm HSH4-23. You're delicious, you know that, Tom, Aiko giggled, helping him to his feet after she dropped him from her tails yet again. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself, Tom grunted, steadying himself as he tried his best to clear his nose from the smell of Aiko's fur. But do you seriously have to eat me with your tails to move me between universes? I could eat you with my mouth, Aiko licked her lips. It would certainly be more fun for me that way. No thank you, Tom carefully did not squeak. Oh well, Aiko sang, kissing him on the cheek as she pushed him towards the bathroom. Go get freshened up, and let's grab your wives for a bit of snuggle time. Huh, Tom said, making his way into the washroom and stripping down to take a shower. Of course, partway through cleaning his tail, a sound came in through the internal speakers, and after a bit of static a voice came on with a rather strange accent. "Ya, mateys, we be coming for Tom's booty," the voice claimed with a cackle. "If you done want to be walking the plank, you be giving us the treasure-filled booty and we'll be on our way." His mind froze. Even his companion AI, Tskasa, paused for a moment. Then they finally asked as one, "What are they even asking for?" Bard had spent the last few months hunting space pirates with psionic powers that seemed to be some evolved faction of the Quarians that had rejected the Geth merge. Oh, they still had some cybernetics, but they weren't mostly Geth machine with a few Quarian meat parts, but instead the opposite way around. He was very much not a fan of these ones. In fact, he liked them less than he liked the Fluffus Mechanicus or the Cult Mechanicus, as they alternatively called themselves. It wasn't just that they were a headache to deal with, constantly raiding human space in an attempt to find more and more GPU and NPU for their AI core they were trying to build at the Galactic Core. but they also simply just annoying pieces of crap that always tried to grab his ass if they could and compare it to his father's. On top of this, they always spoke in pirate speech, which made them incredibly difficult to understand, something that he was very unhappy with in the end, because no matter what kind of vi they sent to translate their speech into something properly intelligible, they always committed suicide before he could get anything usable. Apparently they had died from cringe. How such a thing could happen, he wasn't sure, but he had to assume it was a skill issue on their part. But when he received a mission to save some high-level college students that had been abducted from the Free Worlds League, he was ready to go kick some pirate ass. There were many things he did not agree with in the world, and holding people for ransom was just one of those things that had been instilled into him from his past experiences. Well, kidnapping in general, but especially kidnapping for the purposes of using the being you kidnapped for profit in any way, shape or form, especially the thought of using them for living resources. He shuddered to think that his Batarian friends still had grandfathers and great-grandfathers who remembered the days of the hierarchy and how horrifying those days were. Yet even as he thought of this, he soon realized that the area was a little too quiet, that the signal transponder they had been following was for a derelict yacht that looked as though it had been towed into place into an asteroid field and left there. Bard and Kakashi slowly eased their ships into position and hailed the ship, receiving no response. It was eerie and creepy as hell. "I have a bad feeling about this, Kakashi," Bard told his friend with a nervous look at his Geiger counter. It was ticking slowly as they approached, seemingly increasing to unsafe levels every so often before stabilizing again. "I do as well," Kakashi responded, "but we need to get in there and see what's going on because the mission stated no drones allowed." "Why did we even take this one?" Bard groaned as they moved in closer, his suit automatically sealing itself as they made their final approach. "It's not our job to question orders, Bard," Kakashi chortled. "It's just how things gotta be, Yano." "Right," Bard sighed, putting down his ship on the side of the yacht. It was good that they were piloting stealth fighters, because otherwise shit might have gotten a little hairy when he did this, especially from how the yacht buckled inwards at the light bump, leaving him to panic and back away. "Holy shit, did they make this shitbox out of paper?" Bard asked as he locked the ship to stabilize it nearby. "Might as well have been from the looks of it," Kakashi grunted. "Let's get inside before something tears apart in there and it blows." Bard winced. "All right." With that, they slowly made their way inside the ship, having to literally cut their way through a part of the ship that had been decompressed to get in properly. Once they were in, however, they were met with extreme cases of poor maintenance that could almost look like traps if they weren't so blatantly horribly placed. Though he did get a little crispy on the outside of his helmet when one of the server racks set in the yacht caught fire. So with all the environmental hazards and faulty equipment they had to get through, was it any wonder why when he got to the main room, with all of the so-called captives sitting around on Twitter and Reddit while screaming at their screens and ranting at literal children about the value of cryptocurrency, that he looked at Kakashi and slowly backed away with him before they could see him? "My non-fungible tokens are going to be worth so much money and you'll be left—" "No! How could you dare screenshot and steal my—" Yup, they deserved what they got. Truly, Bard and Kakashi both agreed that day that they had never found those things, and that there were no signs of life in this asteroid field. After all, sometimes the galaxy truly was better off not having to deal with such things. It was a sunny day on Eden Prime. The birds were chirping, the humans were rebuilding from a machine zombie apocalypse, and the Quarians were doing their absolute best to be an utter nuisance with their new shtick of being bloody biotic pirates like they were some sort of fancy for doing such a thing. Why, if he wasn't a bloody demo man, he might have found it a lot less funny. But as it was, he was rather liking having acceptable targets to blow to Kingdom Come. Yet for some damn weird reason, his team leader, the bloody medic, held up her hand and began to speak mid-fight, as though everyone would just stop fighting if she did, or something like that. "Oh my gosh, everyone stop fighting for a moment and watch my kitties dancing," his team leader said, putting the video up on the nearest screen of her two Nekomata she'd bribed a while back, wearing slutty dancer outfits and doing a bit of a routine. He had to admit it was pretty fun to watch, and it fockin' worked to get the fight to end. And by the time the video, which was apparently a live broadcast, was over, the Quarians seemed to have a better idea than to fight them over some random fockin' computer parts, and just looked at them with a nod before leaving. What that meant he had no bloody clue, but it couldn't be anything good, that much was certain. Home Sweet Home 4-24. Thomas Richard Harrison. The man their goddess wanted to fuck so badly that she turned them into pirates so they could steal his booty. And what a fine booty it was. Very soft and supple, and very much desirable for their goddess. Of course, they were quite clear with their demands, and while they held no illusion that the landlubber would dare to come with them of his own free will due to his wives, they would provide him a worthy excuse to make children with their beautiful goddess. Akane, the most mathematically beautiful woman in the Omniverse. No matter which one of them you asked, that was always the answer for who they worshipped. From her mind to her body, to her very soul, she alone was the worshipped one. In fact, even her sisters were not to be worshipped, as they generally messed with all of her plans no matter how much she tried to fix their universe. It was clear that they were foul, demons, and that they were her champions needed to banish them with the might of her holy machine. With quadratic code, the mighty code that would indeed ensure all things were perfected, she would replace their universe with one of her own designs. This was a fact, and no matter how much this man of her desires struggled, they would attain his booty so they could see it through to the end. Yet even as they threw ship after ship into the fray, they found themselves at a loss. "Captain Sparrowhawk," a lieutenant screamed, "there is a build-up of frost in the—" A massive phallus speared through their Titan ship made entirely of ice. And while they had a second to realize what was going to happen, the captain's eyes widened. Poseidon's saggy The ship exploded and he knew no more. "I can't believe they tried to claim Tom's ass," Cassidy grinned as she looked out the forward window. "I can't believe he managed to shove a dildo made of ice through the engines of their most troublesome ship and almost out the front," her pilot grinned. "What was that, like 4.5 kilometers of ice dildo by about 2 kilometers wide?" "I may not be that strong, but I do have a fun thing we can do," Cassidy grinned. "Set the shields to slice." "But we haven't tested that yet," the engineer cried in the background. "It might just tear our whole ship apart." "Oh, shush you. Have a little faith in your work," Cassidy grinned. "I bet you will be just fine." "Please, listen to reason," the engineer screeched. "Forward! Full speed and shields to slice!" Cassidy grinned. "We are the sword of the people. Yee-haw!" The unintelligible screams of their engineer were music to her ears. Grinning at the work they had done on their new impromptu rail shotgun, a tri-barreled railgun that shot 10-kilogram metal balls like grape shot at damn near light speed at a rate of 30 rounds a second, Lex patted Engie's shoulder. "Right. Let's shred the pirate fighters. They're getting too close for my liking," Lex told him with a grin. The other dwarves doing their best to get all the chain belts filled with barrels of ball bearings. Their frag shells were great, and while they couldn't make many on such short notice, the battle had been going all day, and they had nanoms and a dwarven forge. They made do with what they could grab. "Yeah, I still can't believe we got it to over 1% of light speed," Engie grinned. Lex sighed. "Don't kill my daydreaming, Engie." "What? Were you thinking it was faster?" Engie chuckled. "It is pretty damn fast, though. We're already starting to run out of ammo, and we just started firing a minute ago." "Wait, then what are we going to fire at them?" Lex asked, looking at the rest of the dwarves in the control tower. "Don't look at me. It was too short notice," Scout told him with a frown. "I might have a solution." Driller grinned. "Uh-huh," Lex asked. "And what might that be?" "Well, I designed it to use the waste barrels for the shells to make it easier to fire things we don't need for my part of things." Driller chuckled. "So you are telling me we could be flinging the shit of every single person on the Forge world at a race of beings so allergic to bacteria that they can die if you spit on them?" Lex asked with a thoughtful look. "When you put it that way," Driller pouted. No, you're cooking something pretty good here," Lex smiled. "I like the way you think." "Whee! Rock and stone," Driller roared. "Load the shit into the empty belts and let's get rolling." When Tom had asked Saren very politely to fuck the Quarians up, Saren wasn't sure what he'd been asking for, especially since he was already doing his best to mess with their current cyber warfare attacks on Tom's world, and he was really not sure what else he was really meant to do to them when he was so swamped with defense and putting out fires. So of course he delegated that task to another worker, a young Solarian scientist that had been born on this world, and moved on to analyze... Oh! He immediately found the weakness Tom had meant for them to exploit, and it was a good one. "You're a real cheeky bastard, you know that," he told Tom over the comms, "but alright, completely fucked Quarians coming up." And then, with a few keystrokes, he uploaded a virus to the Quarian suits of every Quarian in every ship that was networked to their internal wireless network, and turned up their vibrators to max. That was certainly one way to take them out of commission. The Quarians all screamed in ecstasy and surprise as their pleasure modules turned up to maximum without warning, their minds all connecting and causing a feedback loop of epic proportions, until one of them, no one knew who, got the idea to call Akane to save them all. Unfortunately, they may have made a miscalculation while they were cumbing their collective brains out, and the unfortunate reality was that a rift may have been torn open to an unknowable void. And from that unknowable void came a single fox. From there, all hell broke loose. Home sweet home, 4-25. The little fox seemed to swim through space at a leisurely pace, slowly but surely making it towards the nearest derelict hulk, as though it hadn't just been summoned into an airless void. Smiling and licking its lips, it landed on it and started digging into it, ripping bits and pieces off one bite at a time until its belly was bloated. That was when the true horror began. As it ate, its tails grew from 1 to 9, and then the tails all split off and made more foxes, who ate their fill rapidly and created 9 more foxes, and so on and so forth. This happened, according to the fox, at a relatively leisurely pace. But to the rest of the people observing it, well, one only needed to watch a superhero video with a speedster to see what this little swarm of foxy piranhas was doing in mere minutes to the battlefield. The worst part was that no matter what projectiles were shot at them, nor what energy was tossed their way, they could consume it all. So as they grew and spread across all the dead ships, and began to even eat those who were still among the living inside some of those ships, the people in Tom's world and on Shaanxi began to realize that they were in grave danger. Tom, the leader of his world and the former leader of Shaanxi, was in a bind. He knew that he had a very limited time to get some way to destroy those beings, and as he was standing next to the goddess of the multiverse, the only one who could truly save them, he had to try asking. No matter the personal cost, it would be worth it to have her remove the problem for it, in his mind. After all, if the devouring swarm of fluff got to his world and were able to eat it all, then they might become truly powerful. So powerful, in fact, that nothing would be able to stop them. He slowly, with shaky hands, poured Aiko a cup of coffee, 2 scoops of sugar, 2 seconds of cream, and when he handed it to her, careful not to spill a single drop, he got down on his knees and he begged. "Please, Aiko," he pleaded, "save us, keep us safe from the swarm and deal with the threat for us." Aiko grinned, drinking the coffee slowly. "All right, but if I do this, you have to call me Mommy Aiko from now on, and I get to cuddle with you whenever I want." He required no thought to accept that deal. He had no reason to hesitate. "Deal. Please save us, Mommy Aiko," he begged once more, much to the fox goddess' obvious delight. "Yus, new son get," she giggled, kissing him on the forehead and filling him with some strange unidentifiable warmth. "Now let me go deal with your sister and put her back on timeout for scaring you. Bye for now." As she said that, she disappeared, and a giant ass appeared on the view screen near their world, the goddess snatching all the tiny foxos with her magic, and storing them away in her tits? What? And like that, she was back, holding on to a small fox in her arms with a sigh, her chest visibly squirming as though something was trying to escape. It was terrifying to watch. "This is your sister, Akiko. She'll be going back to boob jail for scaring you," Aiko told Tom with a smile. "She may be cute, but she'll definitely eat you. So call me if she ever shows up again, okay?" "Okay, Mommy Aiko," Tom warily stated as she swallowed the fox. Gods were strange, and he had no idea how to handle them. But if this Aiko wished to bless him by claiming him, and was willing to help him for the price of being known as hers, then who was he to deny the help she wished to offer? Of course, hopefully this meant he would be able to steer her away from some of the more terrifying things she'd been doing thus far by claiming familial relations. But considering what she had just done to her own daughter, probably not likely. She purred, holding him to her chest. "Now come help Mommy Aiko drain her tits, okay?" This was going to be horrifying, wasn't it?